I was watching my little sister's wedding dance when my phone buzzed. The message read, "The $200K house you're paying for. It's her wedding gift. From us." I looked up. My mother caught my eye across the reception hall and smiled. Not the warm kind. The kind that said, "What are you going to do about it?" 15 years. 15 years I'd worked 2 jobs to afford that house. 15 years my parents lived there, temporarily, never paying a dime, never leaving. And now they were just giving it away. When I approached her later, champagne still in hand, Mom didn't apologize. She laughed. "You're 38 and single, Diana," she said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Renting suits you." I should have screamed, should have made a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled back, raised my glass, and whispered 6 words that would change everything. "You have 3 days to leave." What happened next? Let's just say my mother thought she knew me, thought I was the obedient daughter who'd swallow anything. She was wrong, because what she didn't know was that I owned more than just the house. I owned the land beneath it. And the woman who gave me that land? She wasn't a stranger. This is the story of how I took back everything they stole and discovered family secrets that went back 40 years. Secrets about my grandmother, about my mother's past, about a letter that should have changed everything. Stick with me, because this gets wild. My name is Diana Patterson. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years as an office manager at a small accounting firm in Sacramento. I'm not anyone special, just a woman who works hard, pays her bills on time, and thought she understood what family meant. I was wrong about that last part. The Riverside estate was exactly the kind of venue my mother would choose for Nina's wedding. All sweeping staircases and crystal chandeliers with those floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the late afternoon sun just right. The kind of place that whispered old money even though our family had never had any. String quartet playing Pachelbel. White roses everywhere. 200 guests in their Sunday best, all watching my baby sister marry a man whose family owned 3 car dealerships across Northern California. I'd helped pay for this wedding, actually, not that anyone would mention it. I'd quietly written a check for $5,000 when Mom hinted that the flower budget was running short. That's what good daughters do, right? We show up. We smile. We write the checks and don't ask for credit. I was standing near the champagne fountain watching Nina and David glide across the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. Nina looked beautiful. She always did. 26 years old, with Mom's high cheekbones and Dad's easy smile, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The kind of girl who'd never had to work 2 jobs. Who'd never had to choose between groceries and gas. Who'd floated through life on charm and good timing while I'd learned early that nothing came easy for me. I wasn't bitter about it. Not really. That's just how it was in our family. Nina was the golden child and I was the dependable one. The one who showed up early and stayed late. The one who could be counted on to handle the hard things without complaining. My phone buzzed in my clutch purse right as the song shifted to something slower. I almost didn't check it. But it buzzed again, insistent, and some instinct made me pull it out. The number was blocked. The message was only 19 words long. "The $200K house you're paying for, it's her wedding gift. From us." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. My hands went cold. The champagne glass I'd been holding suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Around me, people were laughing, clinking glasses, wiping happy tears. The quartet was playing something beautiful, and I was standing there watching my entire world tilt sideways. The house. My house. The 3-bedroom craftsman on Oak Street that I'd bought 15 years ago when I was 23 and stupid enough to believe that owning property meant security. I'd scraped together $40,000 for the down payment by working days at the accounting firm and nights waitressing at an upscale Italian restaurant where the tips were good if you smiled hard enough. I'd signed those mortgage papers with hands that shook from exhaustion and pride. My parents had moved in 6 months later. Just temporarily, Dad had said. Just until we get back on our feet. That was in 2010. They were still there. Still in my house. Still paying exactly $0 in rent, while I covered the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs, when the water heater died, or the roof needed new shingles. And now they were giving it to Nina. I looked up from my phone, and that's when I saw her. My mother, Claire Patterson, standing near the head table in a silver dress that probably cost $1,000. She was watching me. Our eyes met across the crowded reception hall, and she smiled. Not the warm, motherly kind of smile. The other kind. The kind that said she knew exactly what message I'd just received and she wanted to see what I'd do about it. I should have walked over there, should have demanded an explanation. But my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I watched as she leaned over to whisper something to the woman next to her. Both of them glanced my way. Both of them laughed. That's when I started walking. Not toward her, toward the bar. I needed another drink, and I needed a minute to think, and I needed to not scream in the middle of my sister's wedding reception. The bartender poured me a fresh glass of champagne without my having to ask. I must have looked like I needed it. I took a long sip and tried to steady my breathing, tried to make sense of what was happening. 15 years of mortgage payments, almost $200,000 in total when you added up all the interest. Money I'd earned through double shifts and missed vacations and saying no to things I wanted because the house payment was due. And they were just giving it away. Diana. I turned. Mom had appeared beside me, her smile still in place, her voice pitched low so no one else could hear. You look upset, sweetheart. I just got an interesting text, I said carefully. Oh. She took a sip of her own champagne, utterly unconcerned. About what? About my house. Your house. She said it like the words tasted funny. Diana, you're 38 years old and still single. You don't need a whole house to yourself. Renting suits you, it always has. She said it loud enough for the people around us to hear. The couple to my left glanced over. The woman looked sympathetic. The man looked uncomfortable. I own that house, Mom. Do you? She patted my arm. The gesture somehow both affectionate and condescending. Well, Nina needs it more. She's starting a family, you understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that in my mother's eyes, I would always be the expendable daughter, the one who existed to prop up everyone else, the one whose sacrifices didn't count because I was supposed to make them anyway. I smiled at her, picked up my champagne glass, and walked back toward the dance floor where Nina and David were laughing with their friends, where the string quartet was playing something lovely, where everyone was celebrating a beautiful beginning. I raised my glass along with everyone else when the best man called for a toast. I smiled when people took photos. I hugged Nina and told her she looked beautiful because she did. And the whole time I was thinking about what came next. They thought I'd swallow this. Thought I'd cry in private and accept it and move on like I always did. Thought I was the good daughter who'd toast to their happiness, even as they stole everything I'd worked for. They thought I'd toast to their betrayal. I was toasting to my plan. I drove home from the wedding around midnight, my head pounding from champagne and fury. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Mom and Dad's car wasn't there. They'd probably stayed at the hotel near the venue celebrating with Nina and the extended family. Celebrating what they'd stolen from me. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the front porch light I'd installed myself 3 years ago when the old one finally died. The Craftsman-style columns I'd had repaired, the mailbox I'd replaced, the lawn I'd reseeded twice. Every single detail of this house had my fingerprints on it. I was 23 years old when I bought this place. Fresh out of junior college with an associate's degree in business administration and a job offer from Henderson and Associates, a small accounting firm that paid $32,000 a year. It wasn't much, but it was steady. My own apartment was costing me $900 a month, and I was throwing that money away on rent while building exactly zero equity. So I did what any terrified young woman with more ambition than sense would do. I decided to buy a house. The mortgage broker laughed when I told him my income. He actually laughed. Said there was no way I'd qualify for anything in Sacramento on that salary. Not unless I had a substantial down payment, 20% minimum. That would be $40,000 for the $200,000 fixer-upper I'd found on Oak Street. I got a second job the next week. Waitressing at Bella Notte, an Italian restaurant in Midtown where businessmen took their wives for anniversaries and where the wine list started at $60 a bottle. The tips were incredible if you could handle the 12-hour shifts and the way men twice your age would let their hands linger too long when you refilled their water glasses. I handled it. I smiled and brought them overpriced pasta and collected my cash at the end of every night. For 2 years, I lived on almost nothing. I bought clothes at thrift stores. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I said no to every invitation, every concert, every girls' weekend in Tahoe. My friends from college stopped calling after a while. They thought I was boring. Maybe I was. But I had a goal, and every dollar I saved went into a shoebox in my closet that slowly, painfully filled up with cash. $40,000. It took me 2 years and 3 months to save it. I was 25 years old when I finally sat down at the title company and signed my name 73 times on documents I barely understood. The house was mine. Legally, completely mine. I cried in my car afterward, shaking with relief and terror, because I'd just committed to 30 years of payments, and I had no idea if I could actually pull it off. I pulled it off. For 15 years, I never missed a single payment. Not when the hot water heater exploded. Not when I got pneumonia and missed 2 weeks of work. Not when the firm cut salaries during the recession, and I had to pick up extra weekend shifts at a coffee shop just to make ends meet. I paid. Every month. On time. My parents moved in 6 months after I bought the place. Dad had lost his job at the hardware store. Some dispute with his new manager, he said, though I suspected there was more to the story. Mom wasn't working. She'd been a part-time receptionist at a dental office, but she'd quit years earlier because the dentist had been rude. They needed a place to stay. Just for a little while. Just until they figured things out. That was November 2010. 14.5 years ago. They took the spare bedroom upstairs. The one with the nice bay window that looked out over the backyard. I told myself it was temporary. Told myself it was the right thing to do. Told myself that this is what family did for each other. They never paid rent. Not once. Oh, Dad would occasionally hand me $40 and say it was for groceries, but that was it. Meanwhile, I kept paying the mortgage, the property tax that went up every year, the homeowner's insurance, the city utilities. When the roof needed replacing after a bad storm, I paid for that too. $12,000 on a credit card that took me 3 years to pay off. And they stayed. Monday morning, I called PG&E to question a bill that seemed unusually high. The customer service representative was cheerful and unhelpful. She explained that my electricity usage had jumped significantly in the past 4 months. Was I running space heaters? Had I gotten a hot tub? No, I told her. Nothing had changed. She suggested I check for phantom power drains, appliances that draw electricity even when they're off. I thanked her and hung up my mind, already racing. I went through the bills more carefully that night after work. Electric, gas, water, garbage. All of them had nearly doubled since January. 4 months of charges that made no sense unless someone was using significantly more resources than usual. That's when I remembered the car I'd seen in the driveway 2 weeks ago. An older Honda Civic I didn't recognize. I'd assumed it belonged to one of Mom's church friends. She was always having people over for coffee, except it had been there at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. I checked my Ring doorbell footage. It took me an hour of scrolling, but I found it. March 15th. A man in his 30s carrying a duffel bag up my front steps. My mother answering the door, shaking his hand, leading him inside, leading him upstairs, to the 3rd bedroom, the one I used for storage, the one I'd been meaning to clean out for years, but never had time to deal with. The man stayed for 3 weeks according to the footage, left every morning around 6:30, returned every evening around 7, paid my mother cash. I watched her count it on the porch one morning, then tuck it into her purse. There'd been others, too. A woman in her 50s who stayed for 2 weeks in February. A young couple who stayed for 10 days in April. All of them paying cash. All of them being shown to that third bedroom by my mother, who smiled and chatted with them like she was running a bed and breakfast. In my house. The house I was still paying for. The house she was apparently giving to Nina. My phone rang Wednesday afternoon while I was staring at 6 months of utility bills spread across my kitchen table. Fran Mitchell, my next-door neighbor. 70 years old, retired CPA, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "Honey," she said without preamble. "I was down at the county assessor's office today, filing some paperwork for my nephew, and I saw something odd on the property records for your address. I think you should go check your title. Something doesn't look right." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Just go look at it yourself, sweetheart. Tomorrow morning. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am." I sat there after we hung up, looking around my kitchen. At the cabinets I'd refinished. At the backsplash I'd installed. At the table I'd bought at a garage sale and lovingly restored. She didn't just live in my house. She profited from it. I took Thursday morning off work. Told my boss I had a dentist appointment, which wasn't exactly a lie since my teeth had been grinding so hard at night that my jaw ached. But instead of going to the dentist, I drove straight to First Republic Bank on J Street, where I'd held my mortgage for the past 15 years. The lobby smelled like new carpet and artificial lemon. I'd been here exactly once before on closing day back in 2010, when a cheerful loan officer named Patricia had walked me through the final signatures. I didn't see Patricia now. Instead, a young woman at the reception desk asked how she could help me, and I said I needed to verify ownership documents on my property. She directed me to a desk in the back corner where a man in his 50s sat behind a nameplate that read, "Richard Torres Loan Services." He had kind eyes and the patient expression of someone who'd spent decades explaining complicated financial documents to nervous people. "Ms. Patterson," he said after I'd introduced myself and provided my identification. "Let me pull up your account." He typed for a moment, squinting at his computer screen. I sat across from him with my purse clutched in my lap, my heart hammering against my ribs. Part of me hoped Fran had been mistaken, that everything was fine, that I was worrying over nothing. "Here we are," Richard said. 923 Oak Street. You've been with us since April 2010. Excellent payment history, I see. Never missed a single month. That's impressive." "Thank you," I managed. "I wanted to confirm that I'm listed as the primary owner, the sole owner." "Absolutely." He turned the monitor slightly so I could see it. "You're the only name on the mortgage, Diana Marie Patterson. The property is in your name alone." Relief washed over me so intense I felt dizzy. "So no one else has any legal claim to it. My parents have been living there, but they're not on any paperwork. Not on the mortgage, no." He clicked through a few more screens. "You're the sole borrower and the sole owner of the improvements on the property." I blinked. The improvements? The house itself, the building. He glanced at me, and something in my expression must have concerned him because his eyebrows drew together. "Ms. Patterson, do you know about the underlying land deed?" My mouth went dry. "What underlying land deed?" Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "When you purchased the property in 2010, you acquired ownership of the structure. The house, any outbuildings, the improvements. But the land itself was already owned. That's not uncommon in certain situations, though it's unusual in residential real estate. Usually we see it with long-term ground leases or historical properties." "I don't understand." My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "I bought the house, the whole property, that's what I signed for." "You bought the house, yes, but according to our records, there's a separate land deed that predates your purchase by 25 years, filed in 1985. He typed something else, then frowned. "The land is owned by a Helen Morrison. Is that a family member? Helen Morrison." The name meant absolutely nothing to me. I'd never heard it before in my life. "No," I said slowly. My mother's maiden name was Chen. My father's mother was a Patterson. I don't know anyone named Helen Morrison. Richard looked uncomfortable now. Well, she owns the land beneath your house. Has since 1985 according to county records. Your mortgage is secured by the building itself, but the land ownership is separate. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. How is that possible? How could I buy a house without buying the land? It's complicated, Richard admitted. Sometimes in older transactions, especially if there were family arrangements or estate situations, the land and the improvements get separated. Did your real estate agent explain this to you at closing? I tried to remember, tried to recall sitting in that title company office 15 years ago, exhausted from working double shifts, overwhelmed by the stack of documents I'd signed. Had anyone mentioned a separate land deed? Had I been too young and too tired to understand what I was agreeing to? I don't think so, I whispered. I just remember signing the mortgage papers. They said I was buying the house at 923 Oak Street. No one said anything about land ownership being separate. Richard pulled up another screen and studied it for a long moment. The land deed was recorded at the county in August 1985. Owner of record is Helen Morrison. There's an address listed, but it's quite old. Would you like me to print this information for you? Yes, please. He printed several pages while I sat there trying to make sense of this. My mother had moved into that house with my father in 2010. But someone named Helen Morrison had owned the land since 1985, 25 years before I'd bought the place. Who was she? Why did she own the land under my house, and why hadn't anyone told me Richard handed me the printouts? I stared at the top page. Land deed, Sacramento County. Parcel number. Legal description with all those incomprehensible measurements and boundary markers. And there, in plain black text, Helen Morrison grantor, recorded August 12, 1985. What does this mean for me? I asked. Legally, I mean. If she owns the land and I own the house, it means you have what's called a separated estate, Richard said carefully. You own the improvements. She owns the fee simple title to the land. It's not ideal, and it can create complications if either party wants to sell or if there are disputes about use of the property. I'd strongly recommend you consult with a real estate attorney. I left the bank 20 minutes later with a folder full of documents I barely understood and a head full of questions. I sat in my car in the parking lot and searched for Helen Morrison on my phone. There were dozens of them across California, but when I added Sacramento to the search, I found her, Helen Morrison, 89 years old. Last known address from public records was a P.O. box, but when I searched her name with Sacramento and nursing home, I found a thread on a caregiver forum from 2 years ago. Someone asking about memory care facilities in the area had mentioned visiting their mother at St. Mary's Nursing Home on Arden Way. The poster's screen name was H. Morrison 47, St. Mary's. I knew where that was. A sprawling complex near the freeway with manicured lawns and a reputation for good end-of-life care. I stared at my phone for a long time. An 89-year-old woman I'd never heard of owned the land my house sat on. A woman who was apparently living in a nursing home, possibly with dementia or some other condition that required memory care. A woman whose name my mother had never once mentioned in all the years I'd known her. I looked down at the bank documents again, at the clean official language that said I was the sole owner of the mortgage, the sole owner of the structure. But someone else, some stranger, owned the ground itself. I owned the house, but a stranger owned the ground it stood on. I spent the rest of Thursday in a fog, barely able to focus on anything except the name Helen Morrison and the impossible fact that a stranger owned the land beneath my house. But by Friday morning, another question had pushed its way to the front of my mind. Nina. My sister had to know something about this. She was the one supposedly receiving my house as a wedding gift. She had to be involved. I texted her around 10 that morning. Need to talk. Can you meet for coffee? Her response came back almost immediately. David's playing golf. I can meet at noon. The Starbucks on Fair Oaks. I got there 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table away from the windows, away from the other customers. When Nina walked in, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight since the wedding. Her face looked drawn, and there were dark circles under her eyes that even carefully applied concealer couldn't quite hide. She was wearing oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and she kept them on until she sat down across from me. "Hi," she said softly, wrapping her hands around the latte I'd already ordered for her. "You sounded upset in your text." "I got an interesting message at your wedding," I said, keeping my voice level. "Someone sent me a text saying that Mom and Dad are giving you my house." Nina's face went pale. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "Diana, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know anything about that until I got the same text." "You got the same text?" "No." She shook her head, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I mean, it came from my phone, but I didn't send it. Mom did." I stared at her. "What do you mean Mom sent it?" Nina pulled off her sunglasses, and I saw that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. "I was getting dressed before the reception. Remember how I went back to the bridal suite to change into my reception dress? Mom came with me to help with the buttons. I left my phone on the vanity. When I came out of the bathroom, she was holding it. She said she'd just been checking the time, but I saw her typing something. I asked what she was doing, and she just smiled and said she was sending you a surprise." My chest felt tight. "She used your phone to send me that message." "I didn't know what it said until later. Until you left the reception early and I asked Mom what was going on. She showed me the text. She was laughing about it, Diana. She thought it was funny. She said she wanted to see if you'd make a scene or if you'd just swallow it like you always do." Nina's voice broke. "She said she was testing you. Testing to see if you'd finally grow a spine." I sat back in my chair trying to process this. My mother had deliberately sent that text from Nina's phone, had orchestrated the whole thing to humiliate me to see how I'd react. It was cruel in a way that took my breath away. "I tried to tell her it was wrong," Nina continued, wiping at her eyes. "I told her you'd worked so hard for that house, that it wasn't fair. She just patted my hand and said I didn't understand how the world works, that you were the strong one and I was the one who needed taking care of, that you'd be fine." "Did she actually say she's giving you the house?" Nina nodded miserably. "She's been talking about it for months, since David and I got engaged. She kept saying that you didn't need it, that you were just one person and we'd be starting a family. She made it sound so reasonable, like she was just being practical. I tried to argue, but you know how she is. She makes you feel crazy for disagreeing with her." I did know. I'd spent 38 years learning exactly how Claire Patterson could twist reality until you doubted your own sanity. "Nina, that house is mine. Legally mine. I've been paying the mortgage for 15 years. Mom and Dad have no right to give it to anyone." "I know that now." Nina looked down at her hands. "I'm not going to take it, Diana. I told Mom that last week. That's part of why she's so angry with me." "She's angry with you?" Nina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She's furious, because I told her I don't want the house and I don't want David's money and I don't want any of it." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her expression that frightened me, a kind of desperate exhaustion. "Diana, I need to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone else. Not yet." I leaned forward. "What is it?" "David controls everything," she whispered. "All our bank accounts are in his name. He gives me an allowance, $300 a month for groceries and personal items. That's it. He checks all the receipts. If I spend money on something he doesn't approve of, he takes it out of next month's allowance. I can't buy anything without his permission. I can't go anywhere without telling him where I'm going and who I'll be with." I felt sick. "Nina, that's financial abuse." "I know." She was crying openly now. "I didn't realize it at first. He made it sound so reasonable. He said he was better with money, that he wanted to take care of me, that I didn't need to worry about bills. But now I'm trapped. I have no savings, no credit cards in my name, nothing. If I tried to leave, I'd have nowhere to go." You could stay with me, I said immediately. She shook her head. Not if Mom gives him the house. That's what she's planning, isn't it? To make sure I have to stay with David because I'll have nowhere else to go. I reached across the table and took her hand. Nina, I'm not going to let that happen. That house is mine, and it's staying mine. You can stay with me anytime you need to, right now if you want. There's something else. She pulled her hand back and wrapped her arms around herself. I'm pregnant. For a moment I couldn't speak. Does David know? No. And Diana, it's not his baby. She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear her. There was someone else. Someone I knew before David. We ran into each other 6 months ago and we started talking again and it just happened. I know it was wrong. I know I should have left David first, but I didn't have the courage. I still don't. I felt like I was seeing my sister clearly for the first time in years. Not the golden child, not the favored daughter, but a woman as trapped and controlled as I'd been, just in a different way. I've been planning to leave, Nina said. I've been trying to figure out how. I thought maybe if I took the house from you, I could sell it and use the money to start over somewhere else. That's what Mom suggested. She said you'd understand eventually, that you'd forgive me because that's what you do. She looked at me with devastated eyes. I almost believed her. I almost convinced myself it was okay to take everything you'd worked for because I was desperate. But it's not okay. It's never been okay. I understood then. Understood that Mom hadn't just been manipulating me. She'd been manipulating both of us, playing us against each other, using my house as bait to keep Nina dependent, to keep both of us under her control. We were both experiments in her lab of control. I left Nina at the coffee shop with a promise that she could call me anytime, day or night, and that my door was always open. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a notification. The St. Andrew's Lutheran Church newsletter had just posted to my email. I'd been on their mailing list for years, ever since Mom had signed me up without asking. The featured photo showed my mother standing in front of the church food pantry, surrounded by boxes of canned goods and smiling volunteers. The caption read, Claire Patterson, our dedicated volunteer coordinator, organized this month's record-breaking food drive. Her tireless commitment to serving our community inspires us all. I pulled over to the curb and stared at that photo. Mom looked radiant, warm, generous. The kind of woman who baked casseroles for sick neighbors and remembered everyone's birthdays. The kind of woman people trusted. That's who Claire Patterson was to the outside world. The neighborhood leader who organized block parties and kept the community garden thriving. The church volunteer who'd served on every committee from fundraising to youth ministry. The devoted mother who showed up at school functions and community events with homemade cookies, and that easy laugh that made everyone feel welcome. I'd watched her build that image my entire life. Watched her smile and charm and perform for audiences who had no idea what she was like behind closed doors. When I was 12, I'd won second place in the county science fair. I'd spent 3 months building a working model of the solar system with motors and lights, staying up late every night to get the planetary rotations exactly right. I was so proud. The local newspaper had even sent a photographer. But when I brought the ribbon home, Mom barely glanced at it. She was too busy on the phone planning some church event. When I tried to show her the newspaper article later, she'd waved me away and said something about not letting it go to my head. Pride was a sin, she reminded me. But when Nina made the cheerleading squad her freshman year, Mom threw a party, invited half the neighborhood, stood in our living room and told everyone how talented her youngest daughter was, how she'd always known Nina was destined for great things. I was 16 then, working after school at a grocery store to save for college. I came home that night to find the party in full swing and Mom introducing Nina to everyone as my star. When someone asked what I was up to, Mom said I was figuring things out, in a tone that suggested I was somehow deficient. The pattern had been there all along. Nina got praise for being pretty, for being compliant, for making Mom look good. I got criticism for being too serious, too independent, too unwilling to play the role Mom had assigned me. And when I did achieve something, Mom found ways to diminish it or ignore it entirely. But in public, Mom presented us as the perfect family, 2 beautiful daughters, a stable home, a mother who'd sacrificed everything for her children's happiness. People believed it because Mom was so convincing, because she knew exactly how to perform warmth and generosity when there was an audience watching. My phone buzzed again. A text from Fran. "Thought you should see this." The attached photo showed my mother standing at a counter in what looked like a government office. I could see part of a sign behind her that read County Assessor, and she was leaning over a stack of documents, pen in hand. The quality wasn't great, like it had been taken from across the room, but I could clearly see Mom's face and the papers she was signing. I called Fran immediately. "Where did you get this?" "I took it myself, honey," Fran said. 3 weeks ago. I was down at the assessor's office filing papers for my nephew's estate, and I saw your mother there. She didn't see me. I was curious about what she was doing, so I watched for a minute. She was filing some kind of property tax form. I thought it was strange since you're the one who owns the house." "What kind of form?" I couldn't see the details from where I was standing, but after you called me the other day about checking your title, I started putting pieces together. "Diana, I think she might have filed papers claiming that house as a gift. There are tax advantages to that, you know. If a parent gifts a property to a child, they can avoid certain capital gains issues. But the thing is, you have to actually transfer ownership for it to be a legitimate gift." My hands were shaking. She told the county it was a gift to me or to Nina. "That I don't know. But if she filed it as a gift to you while she's still living there, she'd avoid having to pay rent or claim it as income. She gets all the tax benefits of you being the owner while still treating the place like it's hers. Very clever, actually. Unethical, but clever." I thanked Fran and ended the call, my mind reeling. Mom had gone to the county assessor's office and filed paperwork claiming the house was a gift. Meanwhile, she was living there rent-free, renting out rooms for cash under the table, and apparently planning to hand the whole thing over to Nina eventually. All while I kept making mortgage payments and covering every expense. Another text came through, this one from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Patterson, this is Joyce Hernandez. We met briefly at your sister's wedding. I'm a member of St. Andrews. I think there's something you should know about your mother." A photo loaded below the message. This one showed Mom sitting at a desk across from a woman in business attire. There was a notary seal visible on the wall behind them. Mom was signing something, and the angle of the shot showed several documents spread across the desk. Joyce's next text arrived. "I work at a title company. I saw your mother come in last month with papers she wanted notarized. I shouldn't tell you this, but I recognized your name on the documents. She was signing something related to the property on Oak Street. I didn't handle it personally, but I saw enough to know something didn't seem right. Your mother isn't who you think she is." I sat in my parked car staring at these 2 photos. Claire Patterson at the county office filing false gift claims. Claire Patterson at a notary signing documents related to my house. All of it done behind my back. All of it calculated to give her control while maintaining the illusion that everything was legitimate. To the church, she was a saint. To the neighbors, she was the perfect mother. To the government, she was a generous parent gifting property to her daughter. But to me, she'd said nothing. No conversation about taxes or paperwork or what she was doing with my house. Just manipulation and lies and documents signed in secret. She told the world I owned it. She told the government I gifted it. She told me nothing. I called Fran back within 5 minutes of seeing those photos. "I need a lawyer, a good one. Someone who knows property law and can help me figure out what the hell my mother has done." Fran didn't hesitate. "Margaret Morrison. She's the best elder law and real estate attorney in Sacramento County. She's expensive, but she's worth every penny. I'll text you her office number." The name Morrison made my stomach flip, but I told myself it was a common enough surname. Probably just a coincidence. I called the number Fran sent and somehow got an appointment for Monday morning. The receptionist said they'd had a cancellation and Ms. Morrison could see me at 9 if I could be there on time. Morrison Law offices occupied the third floor of a renovated building in Midtown, all exposed brick and tall windows. The waiting room had the kind of furniture that whispered money without shouting it. Leather chairs, understated artwork, a coffee table with actual books instead of old magazines. Margaret Morrison came out to greet me herself at exactly 9 o'clock. She was in her early 60s, I guessed, with silver hair, cut in a sleek bob, and sharp green eyes behind frameless glasses. She wore a gray suit that fit perfectly and moved like someone who'd spent decades commanding courtrooms. "Ms. Patterson," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm and brief. "Please come back to my office." Her office had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk that looked like it had been handcrafted from walnut. She gestured for me to sit in one of the client chairs while she settled behind her desk with a legal pad and pen. "Fran Mitchell speaks very highly of you," Maggie said. "She mentioned you're having some property ownership concerns." I pulled out the folder I'd been carrying everywhere for the past 4 days. Bank documents, the land deed printout, photos of my mother at the county office and the notary, 15 years of mortgage statements. "It's complicated," I said, and then I told her everything. Maggie listened without interrupting, taking notes in neat shorthand. When I finished, she sat back and tapped her pen against her pad. "Let me make sure I understand. You are the sole owner and mortgagee of the residence at 923 Oak Street. Your parents have been living there since 2010 without a lease and without paying rent. Your mother has been representing the property as a gift on tax documents while simultaneously operating an illegal rental business from the premises. And you've recently discovered there's a separate land deed that predates your purchase." "Yes," I said. "Exactly that. Do you have a copy of the land deed with you?" I handed her the printout from the bank. Maggie pulled on a pair of reading glasses and studied it. I watched her face carefully, looking for any reaction that might tell me whether this was as bad as it seemed. What I saw instead was something I didn't expect. Her hands started to tremble, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. The paper rustled in her grip. "Ms. Morrison, are you all right?" She set the paper down carefully, removed her glasses, and pressed her fingers to her temples. When she looked up at me, her face had gone pale. "Where did you get this?" "From the bank. They said there's a land deed on file from 1985. The owner is listed as Helen Morrison." I paused. "Is that a relative of yours?" Maggie stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to me. She stood there for a long moment, her shoulders rigid. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Helen Morrison is my mother. I haven't seen her in 40 years. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Your mother owns the land under my house." "Apparently so." Maggie turned around, and I saw that her professional composure had cracked. There were tears in her eyes. "I was born in 1963. My mother was 20 years old, unmarried and terrified. She gave me up for adoption when I was 2. I grew up with another family. Good people who loved me and gave me their name, but Morrison was my birth name. I kept it when I became an attorney. Seemed like the one thing I had left of her." My mind was racing. "But if Helen Morrison is your mother, and she owned land in Sacramento in 1985, why didn't you know about it?" "Because I stopped looking for her when I was 30, Maggie said quietly. "I'd tried to find her a few times over the years. Hired investigators searched records. I learned she'd had another child a few years after she gave me away. A daughter she kept. I found an address, drove by, once saw a little girl playing in the yard. I couldn't bring myself to knock on the door. What was I supposed to say? 'Hi, I'm the daughter she threw away, nice to meet you.'" "Another daughter?" I repeated slowly. My throat felt tight. "What was her name? The daughter she kept." Maggie walked back to her desk and picked up the land deed again. "I never learned her name. I just know she was born around 1965, 2 years after me. Helen would have been 22. She looked at me with those sharp green eyes. Ms. Patterson, what was your mother's maiden name? Chen, I said. Claire Chen. She was born in 1965. The silence in that office was absolute. I watched understanding dawn on Maggie's face at the same moment it hit me. Helen Morrison had 2 daughters. One she gave away in 1963. One she kept in 1965. Maggie and Claire. My mother and the woman sitting across from me were half-sisters, which meant the attorney I'd just hired to help me evict my parents was my aunt. My lawyer wasn't a stranger. She was family I never knew existed. Maggie and I sat in her office for another 20 minutes, both of us too stunned to speak coherently. Finally, she cleared her throat and said, "We need to go see her. Today. Right now." St. Mary's nursing home sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, a sprawling single-story building with manicured gardens and a fountain out front. It looked peaceful. The kind of place people chose when they wanted their loved ones to have dignity in their final years. We signed in at the front desk, and a young nurse with kind eyes led us down a long hallway that smelled like lavender and industrial cleaner. "Helen's in the memory care wing," the nurse explained. "She's had advanced dementia for about 3 years now. Most days she doesn't recognize anyone. She doesn't speak much anymore." Maggie's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. I reached over and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Helen Morrison was sitting in a wheelchair by a window in a small private room. She was tiny, maybe 90 pounds, with white hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her hands lay folded in her lap, pale and spotted with age. She was staring out the window at the garden, her expression blank. "Helen," the nurse said gently, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "You have visitors. This is Margaret and Diana. They came to see you." Helen didn't turn her head, didn't acknowledge us at all, just kept staring at those gardens like she was looking at something the rest of us couldn't see. Maggie stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might startle. "Hello," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Margaret. I was born in 1963. You gave me up when I was 2 years old." Nothing. Not even a flicker of recognition. I watched Maggie's face crumble. This woman had spent 40 years wondering about her birth mother, and now here she was, finally face to face with Helen, and there was nobody home. The disease had taken everything. "I'm sorry," the nurse said quietly. "Some days are better than others, but she hasn't had a lucid moment in over a year." "It's all right," Maggie whispered, though clearly it wasn't. The nurse moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. Helen left something for safekeeping. She was very insistent about it before the dementia got bad. She made me promise to give it to someone specific if they ever came looking for her." "Who?" I asked. The nurse smiled. "She said I'd know her when I saw her." "The girl with sad eyes," she said. "The one who carries the world on her shoulders." The nurse looked directly at me. "That would be you, wouldn't it?" My breath caught. Maggie turned to stare at me. The nurse left and returned a moment later with a medium-sized wooden box, the kind that might hold jewelry or important documents. It was locked with a small brass padlock, but the nurse produced a key from her pocket. "She gave me this 3 years ago, right before she stopped being able to communicate clearly. Made me swear I'd keep it safe." She handed me the box. It was heavier than I expected. My hands shook as I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside, nested in tissue paper, were documents. I pulled them out carefully one by one and spread them across the small table by Helen's bed. The first was the original land deed from 1985. Not a copy like the bank had given me, but the actual document with its official seals and signatures. Helen Morrison, sole owner of the parcel at 923 Oak Street. The second was a set of adoption papers. Margaret Chen Morrison, born April 3, 1963, adopted by William and Dorothy Chen, finalized 1965. I looked up at Maggie. "Chen was your adoptive parent's name?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes." The third document made my stomach turn. A birth certificate for a baby girl born December 17, 1965. Mother Helen Morrison. Father unknown, and stamped across it in red ink, abandoned at Sacred Heart Hospital, taken into state custody. That's my mother, I whispered. That's Claire. The fourth item was a letter written on lined paper in shaky handwriting. The date at the top read, March 15th, 2022, just over 3 years ago. I read it aloud, my voice breaking. To the girl with sad eyes, if you're reading this, then you found me. Or maybe I'm already gone and you found this box instead. Either way, you need to know the truth. My name is Helen Morrison. I'm your grandmother, though we've never met. I made terrible mistakes in my life. I gave away my first daughter because I was young and scared and ashamed. I kept my second daughter because I thought I could do better the second time. I couldn't. I was poor and angry, and I took it out on her. I sent her to an orphanage when she was 3. Told myself someone else would give her a better life. No one did. By the time I found her again, she was 30 and married to your father. She had a baby daughter. You. I tried to help. I tried to give her money to make amends. She wouldn't take it, wouldn't speak to me, said I had no right to call myself her mother. She was right. But I watched you anyway from a distance. I saw you grow up, saw you working those 2 jobs to save for a house, saw your mother move in and never leave. I knew what she was. I knew she'd try to take everything from you eventually because that's what hurt people do. They hurt others. So I did the only thing I could. I bought the land under the house you were saving for. I made sure that even if she tried to steal it, you'd always have something she couldn't touch. The land is yours now. It always was. I kept the deed separate to protect you from her. Use it however you need to. And know that I'm sorry. Sorry I failed your mother. Sorry I never had the courage to meet you. Sorry for all of it. But I hope this helps. Love, Grandma Helen. I looked up from the letter. Helen was still staring out the window, lost in whatever world dementia had taken her to. But 3 years ago, she'd been here. She'd been lucid. And she'd been thinking about me, protecting me from her own daughter. Grandma didn't abandon us. She'd been protecting me since before I knew I needed it. Maggie and I spent the rest of Monday afternoon in her office going through every document Helen had left. The land deed was ironclad. Helen had owned that property outright since 1985, and according to her will, which Maggie located in the county records, everything went to my granddaughter, Diana Marie Patterson. The will had been updated in 2022, right around the time Helen wrote that letter. I owned the land. I owned the house. I had every legal right to do whatever I wanted with the property. But first, I needed to give my mother a choice. I went home Tuesday evening and found both my parents in the living room. Dad was reading the newspaper. Mom was scrolling through her phone, probably planning her next church event. They both looked up when I walked in, and something in my expression must have warned them that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. We need to talk, I said, sitting down in the armchair across from them. Both of you. Dad folded his newspaper slowly. Mom set down her phone, her face already arranging itself into that familiar expression of long-suffering patience that said she was preparing to deal with one of my moods. I know about the land deed, I said. I know about Helen Morrison. I know about the paperwork you filed at the county assessor's office. I know you've been renting out the spare bedroom. I know everything. Mom's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. Diana, I can explain all of that. You're misunderstanding the situation. No, I said calmly. I'm not. I understand it perfectly. You've been living in my house rent-free for 15 years while I paid every bill. You've been running an illegal rental business and pocketing the cash. You filed false tax documents. And you planned to give my house to Nina without ever asking me. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked down at his hands. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. I'm going to give you 2 options, and you have 48 hours to decide which one you want. I pulled out the papers Maggie had prepared for me. 2 separate documents, each one laying out a different path forward. Option 1. I said, sliding the first document across the coffee table. You sign a formal lease agreement. $500 per month, which is half the market rate for a room in this neighborhood. The lease requires you to acknowledge in writing that I am the sole owner of this property, that you have no claim to it, and that you've been living here as my guests, not as co-owners. You'll also need to make a public statement to the church community clarifying that you do not own this house and never have. Mom's mouth dropped open. You want me to humiliate myself in front of the entire congregation? I want you to tell the truth, I said. That's option 1. Option 2 is simpler. I slid the second document across the table. You leave, immediately, within 30 days. But if you choose this option, I'll give you $10,000 from Helen Morrison's estate to help you start over somewhere else. Fresh start, clean break, no hard feelings. The silence in that room was suffocating. Dad stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Mom stared at me like I'd grown a second head. $10,000, I repeated. That's more than enough for first and last month's rent on an apartment, moving expenses, and a cushion while you figure out your next steps. It's generous and it's more than fair given that you've lived here for free for 15 years. This is insane, Mom whispered. But her voice didn't have its usual strength. She sounded shaken. These are your options, I said. You have until Thursday evening to decide. After that, I'll proceed with a formal eviction, and you won't get either option. Dad finally spoke. Diana, we're your parents. I know who you are, I said quietly. That's why I'm giving you a choice instead of just calling the sheriff. Mom stood up abruptly. She was trembling, and when I looked closer, I realized she was crying. Not the angry, manipulative tears I'd seen her use to get her way 1,000 times before. These were different. Broken. Devastated. You're offering me what she never gave me. Mom said, her voice cracking. A choice. A way out. Money to start over. She wrapped her arms around herself. Don't you understand? I can't take it. I can't accept pity from a dead woman I hate. This isn't from Helen, I said. This is from me. It's the same thing. Mom's voice rose. You found her letter. You found out about her grand protective plan. And now you're doing exactly what she wanted. You're playing her game. Well, I won't do it. I won't take her charity, and I won't take yours. Then take option 1, I said. Pay rent. Sign the lease. Stay here under my terms. Your terms. Mom laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. You mean her terms? She bought that land to control me, to make sure I could never have anything of my own, to prove that even from the grave she could still manipulate my life, and now you're doing the same thing. Mom, that's not what this is. Isn't it? She wiped at her eyes furiously. You're standing here playing God with my life, offering me scraps like I'm some charity case, making me grovel and confess my sins in front of everyone who knows me. Do you have any idea what that would do to me? What it would cost me? About as much as it cost me to work 2 jobs for 15 years while you lived here for free, I said, and my voice was harder than I intended. Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. She looked at Dad, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He just sat there, silent, useless. I won't do it, Mom said finally. I won't sign your lease, and I won't take your blood money. I won't let you turn me into some pathetic creature who has to beg permission to live in a house that should have been mine in the first place. It was never yours, I said. It was always mine. And if you'd treated it with respect, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Stop playing God, Diana. Mom's voice was cold now. All the tears were gone, replaced by something harder. You're not as righteous as you think you are. She walked out of the room. I heard her bedroom door slam a moment later. Dad looked at me with exhausted eyes. She won't choose either one, he said quietly. You know that, right? Then she'll leave me no choice, I said. I offered her a home. She saw a prison built by the woman she hated most. Thursday evening came and went with no response from my mother. She stayed locked in her bedroom. Dad moved around the house like a ghost, making coffee, reading his paper, avoiding eye contact. When I asked him if Mom had made a decision, he just shook his head and walked away. Friday morning, I did what Maggie had advised. I served them both with formal 30-day notices to vacate. The document was official, notarized, legally binding. It stated clearly that they had 30 days from the date of service to remove themselves and all their belongings from the property at 923 Oak Street. I included a second letter offering them a 3-day grace period to reconsider the lease option. If they signed the lease agreement within 72 hours, I would withdraw the eviction notice. I handed Dad his copy at the breakfast table. He took it without a word, set it down next to his coffee, and stared at it like it might disappear if he ignored it long enough. Mom's copy I slid under her bedroom door. I heard movement inside, heard her pick it up, but she didn't come out. Didn't say anything. Day 1 passed in silence. Dad went to his part-time job at the hardware store like always, came home at 6, heated up leftover soup for dinner, ate alone in the kitchen while I worked at my laptop in the living room. Mom never emerged from her room. I wondered if she was eating. Part of me wanted to check on her, but the rest of me knew that any show of concern would be seen as weakness. She was waiting for me to break, to apologize, to take it all back. I didn't break. Day 2, I woke up to find Dad's car in the driveway, but Mom's sedan gone. Her bedroom door was open, the room empty. Some of her clothes were missing from the closet. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom. I called Dad at work. "Where's Mom?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "She left early this morning. Didn't say where she was going." I tried her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same thing. By evening, I was genuinely worried. Mom might be manipulative and cruel, but she was still my mother, and the thought of her out there somewhere upset and alone made my chest tight with anxiety. Dad came home at his usual time, made himself a sandwich, and went to bed early without saying goodnight. Day 3. Mom's car pulled into the driveway at 10 in the morning. I was working from home trying to focus on a spreadsheet for the accounting firm while my stomach churned with dread. I heard her car door slam, heard footsteps on the porch, heard the front door open. But she wasn't alone. A man followed her inside. He was in his late 40s, wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit right, and carrying a battered leather briefcase. He had thinning hair slicked back with too much gel, and a smile that made my skin crawl. "Diana," Mom said, and her voice was different now. Calm, controlled, almost triumphant. "This is Gerald Brennan. He's my attorney." I stood up slowly from the couch. "Your attorney?" "That's right." Gerald Brennan stepped forward and extended his hand. I didn't take it. He withdrew it without seeming bothered. "Ms. Patterson, I've been reviewing your mother's situation, and I'm afraid there are some legal complications you may not be aware of." "What kind of complications?" He opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "Your mother has been residing at this address continuously since November 2010. That's 14 and a half years of uninterrupted residency. In California, there's a legal principle called adverse possession. When someone occupies a property openly, notoriously, and continuously for a specific period of time, they can actually claim ownership rights to that property." My blood went cold. That's not how adverse possession works. She'd need to be paying property taxes, and she'd need to have a claim of right. Gerald smiled. It was the kind of smile that said he'd had this conversation before, many times. "Actually, Ms. Patterson, the requirements for adverse possession are more nuanced than that. Your mother has been living here as if she were the owner. She's made improvements to the property. She's hosted guests. She's maintained the residence. And most importantly, she's done so with your implicit permission, which establishes her right to be here." "She doesn't have my permission anymore," I said. "That's what the 30-day notice is for." "Ah, but that's where it gets interesting." Gerald pulled out another document. Your mother has been here for over 14 years. That's well beyond the typical adverse possession period of 5 years. In fact, given the length of her residency and the nature of your family relationship, there's a strong argument that she has what's called a life estate in this property, meaning she has the right to live here for the rest of her life regardless of who holds the deed. I felt dizzy. That's not true. She never paid rent. She's not on the mortgage. She has no legal claim to this house. But she does have a claim to residency, Gerald said smoothly. And evicting a family member who's been living in a property for over a decade is significantly more complicated than evicting a standard tenant, especially when that family member is elderly and has nowhere else to go. A judge would look very unfavorably on an attempt to make your aging mother homeless. Mom was standing behind him, her arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not quite victorious, not quite satisfied. Something else, something harder. You're bluffing, I said, but my voice wavered. I'm not. Gerald pulled out yet another document. I've already drafted a response to your eviction notice. We'll be filing it with the court on Monday morning. I'm confident that any judge will see this for what it is, a family dispute, not a legitimate eviction. And in family disputes, the courts tend to favor keeping people housed rather than putting them on the street. She's been committing fraud, I said desperately. She filed false tax documents. She's been running an illegal rental business. All allegations that would need to be proven in court, Gerald said. And even if proven, wouldn't necessarily give you the right to evict her. At most, she'd be fined, but she'd still have her residency rights. He closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. Ms. Patterson, my advice to you is to withdraw the eviction notice. Work out a family arrangement. Let your mother live here in peace. Otherwise, this is going to get very expensive and very ugly for everyone involved. He handed me a business card. Gerald Brennan, attorney at law, an address in a strip mall on the edge of town. My mother will be in touch, he said. Then he nodded to Mom and walked out. Mom and I stood there in the living room facing each other across the coffee table where my laptop still sat open, my work abandoned. Where did you find him? I asked quietly. A friend recommended him, Mom said. Someone from church who had a similar situation with her daughter. He's wrong about adverse possession. Maggie Morrison will tear his argument apart. Something flickered in Mom's eyes at Maggie's name, but she didn't take the bait. Maybe he is wrong, but we'll let the courts decide that, won't we? She picked up her purse from where she'd set it by the door. You have 27 days left on that notice, Diana. I suggest you use them to reconsider. She walked to her bedroom and closed the door. Not a slam this time, just a quiet final click. I stood there holding Gerald Brennan's business card, my hands shaking. Had I made a mistake? Had I moved too fast? What if a judge really did side with Mom? What if 14 years of residency really did give her rights? I hadn't considered. I looked at that card again. At the cheap cardstock. At the strip mall address. At the email address that was just his name at a free email service. Her lawyer smiled like he'd seen this scam work before. Maybe he had. I called Maggie within 5 minutes of Gerald Brennan leaving my house. My hands were still shaking as I tried to read her his business card information. Slow down, Maggie said calmly. Gerald Brennan, you said, from an address on Fulton Boulevard. Yes, he's claiming Mom has adverse possession rights, that she could have a life estate. He made it sound like I don't have any legal ground to stand on. Give me 2 hours, Maggie said. Don't talk to him. Don't talk to your mother. Don't do anything until I call you back. Those 2 hours felt like 2 days. I paced my house, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything except the terrible possibility that I'd miscalculated. That all my mortgage payments, all my years of sacrifice could be meaningless because Mom had lived here long enough to claim squatters' rights. When Maggie finally called back, her voice had an edge to it I hadn't heard before. Sharp, almost gleeful. Diana, I need you to come to my office, right now. There's something you need to see. I made it to her office in 15 minutes. Maggie was waiting with her laptop open and a stack of printouts spread across her desk. Gerald Brennan is not a legitimate attorney, she said without preamble. I mean, technically he passed the bar. He's licensed, but he's been sanctioned by the California State Bar Association 3 times in the past 8 years. She turned her laptop so I could see the screen. It showed an official state bar website with Gerald's record. 3 separate disciplinary actions, all for the same basic offense, preparing fraudulent documents for clients. He specializes in what I call tenancy fraud, Maggie continued. He finds people facing eviction and tells them they have rights they don't actually have. Then he files bogus claims, drags out the process, collects fees from desperate people, and eventually the whole thing collapses. But by then, he's been paid and moved on to the next victim. So his adverse possession argument is fake. Not entirely fake, Maggie admitted. That's what makes him dangerous. There is such a thing as adverse possession in California, but his interpretation is wildly exaggerated. Your mother has no claim because she never paid property taxes on the land. She has no claim to a life estate because there's no legal document establishing one. He's banking on you being scared enough to settle rather than fight. Relief flooded through me. So I can still evict her? Absolutely. But here's what I'm going to do. Maggie picked up her phone. I'm going to call Mr. Brennan and make it very clear that if he files any fraudulent documents in this case, I will personally report him to the state bar for his 4th violation, at which point he'll likely be disbarred. Will that work? Watch. Maggie put the phone on speaker and dialed. Gerald Brennan answered on the 3rd ring. Brennan Law. Mr. Brennan, this is Margaret Morrison. I represent Diana Patterson in the matter of 923 Oak Street. There was a pause. Morrison, I know that name. I'm sure you do. I've been practicing elder law and real estate litigation in Sacramento for 30 years. I'm calling to inform you that any adverse possession claim you attempt to file on behalf of Claire Patterson will be vigorously contested. I've reviewed your disciplinary history with the state bar, and I'm prepared to file a complaint regarding any fraudulent statements you make in court documents. Another pause longer this time. When Gerald spoke again, his voice had lost all its smooth confidence. Ms. Morrison, I was simply advising my client of her potential rights. Her non-existent rights, Maggie corrected. She has no adverse possession claim. She paid no taxes. She has no documentary evidence of ownership. You know this, Mr. Brennan. I don't appreciate threats. It's not a threat. It's a promise. If you appear in court on this matter, I will make sure the judge is aware of your history. I will request sanctions, and I will pursue disciplinary action. Or you can withdraw from this case right now and advise your client to vacate the property as requested. I'll need to consult with my client. You have until Monday morning, Maggie said. After that, I file a motion to dismiss with prejudice and a complaint with the state bar. She hung up, looked at me. He'll be gone by Monday. How can you be so sure? Because he's a coward who preys on people who don't know better. He won't risk disbarment over your mother's case. Maggie leaned back in her chair. But Diana, I need to show you something else. Something more complicated. She pulled up a different document on her computer. I looked into the adverse possession claim more carefully, just to make sure there weren't any surprises. And while your mother has no claim to the house itself, I realized something. If she'd been living on that land continuously since 2010, she might have had a technical claim to the land through adverse possession. Not a strong claim, but enough to make things messy in court. My stomach dropped. Might have had, Maggie emphasized. Past tense, because in June of 2022, my mother renewed the land deed, filed new paperwork with the county reaffirming her ownership. That renewal reset the adverse possession clock. Any claim your mother might have built up over 14 years was wiped clean. She'd have to start over from 2022, which means she's only been there for 3 years. Nowhere near the 5-year minimum required. So we're safe. Not quite. Maggie's expression turned troubled. There's a problem. Helen had dementia in 2022. Advanced dementia. If your mother's lawyer was competent, he could challenge the validity of that renewal. argue that Helen didn't have the mental capacity to sign legal documents. If a judge agrees, the renewal could be thrown out and the adverse possession clock wouldn't have been reset. But Fran witnessed the signature, I said. She told me she was there. I know. And Fran's a retired CPA with an impeccable reputation. Her testimony would carry weight. But Diana, this is where we get into ethical territory. Maggie folded her hands on her desk. Helen was my mother. And 3 years ago, when she signed that land deed renewal, she was suffering from a disease that was destroying her mind. I've seen her medical records from St. Mary's. She was already in the moderate to severe stages of dementia. Are you saying she couldn't have understood what she was signing? I'm saying it's complicated. Some dementia patients have lucid moments. Some can still sign their own names and understand basic concepts even when they can't remember their children's faces. But a good lawyer could argue that any document she signed in 2022 was invalid due to diminished capacity. I stared at her. So the one thing protecting me from Mom's claim could be thrown out if we go to court? Potentially, yes. Maggie met my eyes. But here's what I believe. I believe Helen knew exactly what she was doing when she renewed that deed. I believe she did it specifically to protect you. I believe Fran can testify that Helen was lucid and clear-minded on that particular day. And I believe that if we present this evidence properly, a judge will uphold the renewal. But you're not certain. I'm never certain until a judge makes a ruling, Maggie said. That's the nature of law. But Diana, we have something your mother doesn't have. We have the truth. We have documentation. We have witnesses. And we have the fact that you are the actual legal mortgage-paying owner of that property. She tapped the land deed renewal document on her desk. This is our weapon. Helen gave it to you. She gave it to both of us, really. My mother, who I never knew, who gave me away when I was 2 years old, left us this gift. This protection. The question is whether we use it. I thought about Helen sitting in that nursing home, her mind already slipping away, taking the time to renew a land deed for a granddaughter she'd never met, doing it to protect me from her own daughter's manipulation. We had the weapon. But did we have the right to use it? I left Maggie's office that afternoon with more questions than answers. The legal path forward was clear enough, but the moral path felt murky. I drove home thinking about Helen, about the land deed renewal, about whether using a document signed by a woman with dementia made me as manipulative as my mother. When I pulled into my driveway, there were cars parked along the street I didn't recognize. A small cluster of women stood on my front porch, ranging in age from maybe 40 to 70. 12 of them I counted as I got out of my car. They turned to look at me as I approached. I recognized a few faces from St. Andrew's women I'd seen at church functions over the years but never really knew. The one standing closest to my door was Martha Hendricks, who ran the Sunday coffee hour. Next to her stood Joyce Hernandez, the woman from the title company who'd sent me that photo of my mother at the notary. "Ms. Patterson," Martha said as I reached the porch steps, "we hope this isn't an intrusion. We heard about what's happening with your mother and we wanted to talk to you." My first instinct was panic. Had they come to defend Mom? To tell me I was a terrible daughter for evicting my own parents? "I'm not sure what you've heard, but we heard you're standing up to her," a younger woman interrupted. She had kind eyes and tired lines around her mouth. "Finally." I stared at them. "Finally." Martha gestured to the group. "May we come inside? This isn't a conversation for the street." I unlocked the door and led them into my living room. They filed in quietly, sitting on the couch, the chairs, the floor when the seats ran out. I stood near the fireplace, feeling oddly like I was about to address a congregation. "We know what Claire is like," Martha said without preamble. "Behind the perfect smile and the volunteer work and all that church lady charm, we know who she really is. Most of us have been on the receiving end of her manipulation at one point or another," Joyce added. "Small things usually. She'd volunteer to help with an event and then take over, completely pushing everyone else out. Or she'd make comments that sounded like compliments but left you feeling 2 inches tall." A woman I didn't know spoke up from the couch. "She told me my daughter's wedding was lovely, then spent 20 minutes explaining everything I'd done wrong with the flowers and the seating chart, made it sound like she was just trying to help me learn for next time. She convinced my sister to quit therapy, another woman said. Told her that prayer was all she needed, that therapists just wanted to create problems where none existed. My sister's still struggling with depression 5 years later. The stories came one after another. Small cruelties, subtle put-downs, the kind of behavior that was hard to call out because it was always wrapped in concern or helpfulness or Christian charity. But we all stayed quiet, Martha said. Because Claire has this way of making you feel like you're the problem, like you're too sensitive or ungrateful or unkind for questioning her motives. She made silence look holy. You showed us it's cowardice. I felt my throat tighten. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to protect what's mine. That's exactly why we're here, Joyce said. We want to help. If this goes to court, if you need character witnesses, if you need people to testify about who your mother really is, we'll do it. All of us. You'd do that? I looked around the room at these women, most of whom I barely knew. You'd go to court and speak against someone from your own church community. She's been using that community as a shield for years, Martha said firmly, using her reputation as a good Christian woman to get away with behavior that's anything but Christian. Maybe it's time someone pulled that shield away. An elderly woman sitting in the corner cleared her throat. I recognized her vaguely from church potlucks. Silver hair, gentle face, the kind of grandmother everyone wished they had. I'm Dorothy Chen, she said quietly. I want to tell you something about your mother that you might not know. The room went silent. 23 years ago, my husband was hurting me, Dorothy continued. Her voice was steady but soft. Not just emotionally, physically. I was trapped. I had no money of my own, nowhere to go, and I was too ashamed to tell anyone what was happening. But somehow your mother figured it out. She saw the bruises I tried to hide, the way I flinched when my husband touched me. Dorothy's eyes were distant remembering. She came to my house one night at 2 a.m, rang the doorbell until I answered. My husband was passed out drunk. Your mother looked at me and said, "Get in the car, right now." She drove me to a women's shelter across town, helped me check in, gave me $500 in cash and told me not to go back. She saved my life that night. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. Your mother is capable of extraordinary kindness, Dorothy said. She can see people in pain and reach out to them without hesitation. She's brave and generous and truly good when she wants to be. She paused. But that night when she dropped me at the shelter, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, I know what it's like to be trapped by people who are supposed to love you. I won't let that happen to someone else. Dorothy looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. She saves strangers, Diana. She rescues people she barely knows. But her own family, the people who need her most, she destroys them. I've watched her do it to you and your sister for years. I've wondered why she can show such compassion to outsiders, but such cruelty to her own daughters. The room was completely still. I thought about my mother driving a terrified woman to safety in the middle of the night. Thought about that same woman texting me from my sister's phone just to see if I'd break. Thought about her organizing food drives and serving meals to the homeless while stealing from me and manipulating Nina. 2 versions of the same person. Both real, both true. She saved strangers and destroyed her own. I didn't know which was worse. The women from St. Andrews left an hour later, each one hugging me on their way out. Martha promised to organize the others if we needed court testimony. Dorothy squeezed my hand and whispered, "Be stronger than she was. Break the cycle." I was still processing their visit when my phone rang. Nina's name flashed on the screen. "Diana." Her voice was shaking. "Can I come over? I need help." "Of course. What's wrong?" "I'll tell you when I get there. I'm leaving now." She arrived 30 minutes later in her BMW, the one David had bought her as a wedding present. I watched from the window as she got out, then opened the back door and pulled out 2 large suitcases. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely grip the handles. I met her at the door and took one of the suitcases. Nina, what happened? I told him, she said, and she was crying. I told David I'm leaving. I told him about the baby. I told him everything. We got the suitcases inside. Nina collapsed onto the couch, her whole body shaking with sobs. I sat next to her and waited, giving her time to collect herself. He didn't even seem surprised, Nina finally said. When I told him the baby wasn't his, he just nodded like he'd known all along. Then he said if I left, I'd get nothing. No money, no car, nothing. He said he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. He can't do that. He can try. Nina wiped her eyes. But I don't care anymore. I can't stay in that house pretending to be someone I'm not, pretending to be happy in a marriage that was never real to begin with. I handed her a tissue. You said Mom arranged it. The marriage. Nina nodded miserably. Remember when I was 24, I was dating Marcus, the musician. Mom hated him, said he was going nowhere, that he'd drag me down, that I deserved better. She introduced me to David at some church fundraiser. His family owned those car dealerships, they were wealthy and respectable, and Mom saw an opportunity. But you loved Marcus. I did. Nina's voice broke. But Mom kept pushing, kept talking about security and stability, and how love wasn't enough to build a life on. She made me feel like choosing Marcus would be choosing failure. So I broke up with him. Started dating David because it made Mom happy. Because it made everyone at church happy. Because it was the safe choice. I thought about all the times I'd seen Nina and David together. How they'd seemed fine on the surface but never quite connected. How Nina always looked a little lost at her own wedding. When did you see Marcus again? Last year, 9 months ago. Nina looked down at her hands. I ran into him at a coffee shop. We started talking, just talking at first. He'd grown up, Diana. He had a real job managing a recording studio. He was doing well. And we just clicked again like no time had passed. One thing led to another, and I know it was wrong. I know I should have left David first, but I was so lonely, and Marcus made me feel like myself again. Does Marcus know about the baby? Not yet. I've been too scared to tell him. What if he doesn't want it? What if he doesn't want me? She looked at me with desperate eyes. What if I left David for nothing? You didn't leave David for nothing, I said firmly. You left because you were trapped, because Mom pushed you into a life you never wanted. That's reason enough. Nina's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face went pale. David. He's texting that he's coming to get me, that I can't just take his car and leave. Let him come, I said. You're staying here, with me. Diana, I can't ask you to do that. Not with everything that's already going on with Mom and Dad. You're not asking. I'm offering. I picked up one of her suitcases. Come on. You can take the third bedroom, the one Mom's been renting out. We carried her bags upstairs. The third bedroom still had someone else's belongings in it, a man who'd apparently been renting the room until just last week, based on the date on a receipt I found on the nightstand. I started gathering his things into a trash bag while Nina stood in the doorway. Mom's going to lose her mind when she finds out I'm here, Nina said. Good, let her. We'd just finished clearing the room when I heard Mom's bedroom door open down the hall. Her footsteps in the hallway. Then her voice sharp and shocked. What are you doing? I turned to find Mom standing in the hallway staring at Nina's suitcases. At Nina herself, red-eyed and exhausted. At me holding a trash bag full of strangers' belongings from the room Mom had been secretly renting out. Nina's staying here for a while, I said calmly. Absolutely not. Mom's face was flushed with anger. Nina, you need to go home to your husband. I left David, Nina said quietly. I'm not going back. Don't be ridiculous. You're married. You took vows. I took vows you forced me to take, Nina shot back, and I heard steel in her voice I'd never heard before. You pushed me into that marriage. You made me break up with someone I loved because he wasn't good enough for your image. Well, I'm done living for your image, Mom. Mom's eyes went to the suitcases, then back to Nina. "This is because of her, isn't it?" She pointed at me. "She's been filling your head with poison, turning you against your own family." "No one turned me against anyone," Nina said. "You did that yourself." "You're pregnant," Mom said suddenly, and I saw her eyes had caught on Nina's slightly rounded belly. "That's what this is about. You're having a baby, and you're scared, and you think running away will solve everything." Nina's hands moved protectively to her stomach. She didn't say anything. Mom's face changed, softened. "Nina, sweetheart, listen to me. Every new mother gets scared. But you have a good husband, a beautiful home. Don't throw that away because of hormones and fear." "It's not David's baby," Nina said. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's face went through several expressions: shock, denial, disgust, before settling on cold fury. "You brought her here." Mom turned on me. "You brought her here to my house after what she's done." "This is my house," I said, "and Nina is welcome here as long as she needs to be." Mom looked between us, her carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. The perfect family, the golden daughter who'd married well, all of it falling apart. She married a lie to bury a truth, and now the truth was growing inside her. Mom stormed back to her bedroom and slammed the door. Nina and I stood in the hallway listening to drawers opening and closing, things being moved around with more force than necessary. "I should go," Nina whispered. "I'm making everything worse." "You're staying," I said firmly. "Get some rest. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about Gerald Brennan and his fraudulent adverse possession claims about the land deed renewal that might or might not hold up in court, about the eviction notice that still had 24 days left on it. I thought about what Maggie had said about needing ironclad evidence. Every document, every receipt, every piece of paper needed to tell the same story. This was my house, bought with my money, maintained with my labor. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to my home office. I pulled out the filing cabinet where I kept all my important papers and started going through everything systematically. 15 years of mortgage statements. I had them all printed and organized by year in manila folders. Every single payment from April 2010 to the present Diana M. Patterson primary borrower. Amount due. Amount paid. Never late. Never missed. Property tax receipts going back to 2010. I'd paid those separately from the mortgage, always by check, so there'd be a paper trail. Every year the bill came in my name. Every year I paid it. Thousands of dollars over 15 years, all documented. Homeowners' insurance payments. Another folder full of annual statements and payment confirmations. When the roof needed replacing after that storm in 2018, I'd filed the claim. When the water heater died in 2016, I'd paid the deductible. All of it in my name. Utility bills, 15 years of PG&E statements, water bills, garbage collection fees. The recent spike in usage was right there in black and white proof that Mom had been using more resources than a 2-person household should need. Repair receipts. A whole folder of those. Plumber visits, electrician work, the new furnace I'd installed 3 years ago. The fence repair, the gutter replacement. Every contractor had made the check out to me. Every receipt had my name on it. By 5 a.m, I had everything spread across my desk in chronological order. 15 years of documentation that told one clear, indisputable story: I owned this house. I paid for this house. I maintained this house. Then I realized what was missing: the down payment receipt. The original $40,000 cashier's check I'd used to close the sale in April 2010. I'd had it. I knew I'd had it. It had been in this filing cabinet with everything else. I went through every folder again, checked every envelope, pulled out drawers, and looked behind them in case something had fallen. Nothing. My hands started shaking. Without that receipt, I couldn't prove I'd made the down payment. Couldn't prove that the house had been purchased with my money from the very beginning. Gerald Brennan would use that gap. Would stand up in court and say, "Ms. Patterson claims she bought this house, but she can't prove she made the initial payment." Perhaps it was her parents who funded the purchase. Perhaps this was always intended to be a family property. I tore apart the filing cabinet, went through my closet, my dresser, every box of old papers I'd stored in the garage, searched until the sun came up and I was covered in dust and nearly in tears. It was gone. Somehow, the one document I needed most had disappeared. I called Maggie at 8:30 as soon as I thought she'd be in her office. "I have a problem." She listened while I explained about the missing down payment receipt. There was a long pause on her end of the line. "That's not good," she said finally. "The rest of your documentation is excellent, but that receipt is the foundation. It proves the house was yours from day one. Without it, opposing counsel can create doubt about the initial purchase. Could Mom have taken it? Possibly, or it could have been genuinely lost over 15 years. Either way, we need to find it or find another way to prove you made that payment." I spent the rest of Sunday morning calling the title company that had handled the closing, trying to get copies of old records. They said they'd search their archives, but it would take at least a week. I called the bank where I'd gotten the cashier's check, but they said records from 2010 might not be retrievable anymore. By noon, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my head in my hands, feeling like everything was falling apart. That's when Dad came in from wherever he'd been all morning. He'd been making himself scarce since Nina arrived, probably hiding from Mom's fury. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. "You're looking for the down payment receipt," he said quietly. I looked up. "How did you know?" "Because I have it." He reached into the inner pocket of the brown corduroy jacket he'd been wearing since I was a teenager, the one Mom was always trying to throw away because it was worn at the elbows. He pulled out a folded piece of paper yellowed with age, protected in a plastic sleeve. I took it from him with trembling hands. It was the receipt. Dated April 23, 2010. Cashier's check number 847392, drawn on Wells Fargo, payable to Westwood Title Company in the amount of $40,000. Purchaser, Diana Marie Patterson. "You kept this?" My voice came out as a whisper. "All this time?" Dad sat down across from me. "I kept a lot of things. Insurance in case your mother ever tried to rewrite history. She has a way of making things disappear when they don't fit the story she wants to tell. I figured she'd eventually go after your proof that this was your house." "When did you take it?" "About 6 months ago. I saw her going through your filing cabinet one day when you were at work. She said she was looking for something else, but I knew better. So I started taking the most important documents and hiding them." I stared at him. At this man I'd written off as weak and passive for most of my life. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed you to fight back on your own. If I'd told you what she was doing, you might have confronted her directly, and she would have known someone was watching. This way, she thought she was safe, thought she'd successfully made that receipt disappear." He pushed the paper toward me. "I kept it, in case she tried to erase you completely." I looked down at that receipt, at my father's quiet act of protection that had taken 15 years to reveal itself. All those years I'd thought he was complicit in Mom's manipulation. All those years he'd let me think he was weak. Dad's silence had been strategy, not surrender. I held the down payment receipt in my hands, still trying to process what Dad had just told me. That he'd been protecting evidence. That he'd been watching Mom for months, maybe longer. That his silence had been deliberate. "Dad, what else do you have?" He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes tired but clear. Then he stood up and walked to the coat closet by the front door. I heard him rummaging around, moving things. When he came back, he was carrying a small lockbox, the kind you'd use for important documents or emergency cash. He set it on the kitchen table between us and pulled a key from his wallet. The lock clicked open. Inside was a USB drive. "Everything's on here," Dad said quietly. 15 years of documentation. I started the day you signed the mortgage papers, the day we moved in. I picked up the USB drive. It was small, black, unremarkable. What kind of documentation? Voice recordings mostly. Your mother doesn't know this, but I've been using my phone to record conversations since 2010. Not every conversation. Just the ones where she said things I thought might be important later. Things about the house, about money, about you and Nina. He paused. Things that revealed who she really is when she thinks no one's paying attention. My hands were shaking. You recorded her for 15 years. California's a two-party consent state for private conversations, Dad said. I know that. What I have wouldn't be admissible in criminal court, but in a civil case, especially a family dispute, it's different. And even if a judge won't allow it as evidence, you'd know the truth. You'd have proof that you're not crazy, that you're not imagining things. I stared at him. This quiet man, who I'd watched read his newspaper every morning for 38 years, who'd never raised his voice, who'd seemed to simply accept whatever Mom decided. There's other stuff too, Dad continued. I kept copies of emails she sent me, screenshots of text messages. I started a diary, just simple entries about what happened each day. When she told you that you couldn't come to family dinner because you'd upset her. When she took money from your wallet and claimed she'd borrowed it. When she invited those strangers to stay in your house without asking. All of it's dated and documented. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do all this and never say anything? Dad's eyes filled with tears. Because I was waiting for you to be ready, both you and Nina. I watched your mother control you girls your whole lives. I watched her break down your confidence, make you doubt yourselves, convince you that her version of reality was the only one that mattered. And I knew that if I tried to fight her while you were still under her influence, I'd lose you both. We thought you were weak, I said. We thought you were just going along with everything she did. I know. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. That's what she thought too. That's what I needed her to think. If she'd known I was documenting everything, she would have been more careful. She would have hidden her behavior better. But she thought I was harmless, thought I was too passive to ever stand up to her. So she got sloppy. I opened my laptop and plugged in the USB drive. The folder that appeared had hundreds of files. Audio recordings labeled by date. Word documents titled Daily Log 2010 through Daily Log 2025. A subfolder called Photos with images of documents, text messages, emails. I clicked on one of the audio files at random. It was dated March 2015. Dad's voice came through my laptop speakers, slightly muffled like he was recording from his pocket. Claire Diana said she needs to talk to us about the property taxes. They're going up again this year. Mom's voice sharp and dismissive. Let her pay them. It's her house, isn't it? That's what she wanted, to be the big independent woman who doesn't need anyone's help. Well, she can handle her own bills. She's been handling all the bills for 5 years. We haven't contributed anything. We contribute by being here, by making this place a home instead of some sad, empty house where a spinster lives alone. She should be grateful we're willing to stay. I felt sick. I clicked on another file, then another. Conversation after conversation, where Mom talked about me like I was a burden, a failure, something to be managed and controlled. There were recordings of her on the phone with friends bragging about how she'd convinced Nina to marry David. He's perfect for her, wealthy family, good connections. She would have wasted herself on that musician if I hadn't stepped in. There were recordings of her talking to the strangers she'd rented my spare room, to negotiating prices, collecting cash, warning them not to mention it, to my daughter who thinks she owns this place. There were diary entries in Dad's careful handwriting. Claire told Diana she looked heavy today. Diana hasn't eaten dinner in 3 days. Claire smiled while she said it. And Claire borrowed $200 from Diana's purse. Diana asked about it. Claire said she never took anything. Diana apologized for accusing her. 15 years of cruelty, documented and preserved. Dad, this is devastating. Why didn't you show me this before? Because you weren't ready to see it. Neither of you were. If I'd shown you this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you would have made excuses for her. You would have said I was being unfair, that I didn't understand, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. You were still trying to win her approval back then. He reached across the table and took my hand. But now you're ready. You've seen who she really is. You've started fighting back. Now you're strong enough to use this. Use it how? However you need to. Show it to your lawyer. Show it to the judge if it comes to that. Let people hear what she's really like when the mask comes off. He squeezed my hand. But Diana, I need you to promise me something. What? Use this to free yourself. To get her out of your house, out of your life if that's what you need. But don't use it to destroy her. Don't play these recordings in church or send them to her friends or try to ruin her reputation. That would make you like her. And you're not like her. You're better than that. I looked at him, at this man who'd spent 15 years gathering evidence against his own wife, who'd stayed in a toxic situation to protect his daughters, who'd let everyone think he was weak when he was actually playing a longer, more strategic game than anyone had realized. He'd been gathering ammunition for 2 decades, but he was handing me the gun with the safety on. I spent the rest of Sunday going through Dad's files, listening to recordings, reading diary entries that made my stomach turn. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted and needed air. I told Nina I was going for a drive and found myself heading toward St. Mary's nursing home. I wanted to see Helen again, to sit with her even if she didn't know who I was, to thank her somehow for the land deed, for thinking of me when she had no reason to. The parking lot was quieter than before. I signed in at the front desk, and the receptionist looked up with sad eyes. "Are you here for Helen Morrison?" Something in her tone made my chest tighten. "Yes. Is everything all right?" "I'm so sorry. Helen passed away early this morning, very peacefully in her sleep. The nurse found her around 6. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. She's gone. I'm so sorry. Are you family? We've been trying to reach her next of kin, but the only contact we had was for the attorney listed in her paperwork." "Margaret Morrison?" I said numbly. "That's her daughter. She's also my attorney." "Then you must be Diana." The receptionist's expression softened. "Helen talked about you. Before the dementia got too bad. She said you'd come eventually. Said we'd know you by your sad eyes." She paused. "They're not as sad today, if you don't mind my saying." I stood there feeling like I'd lost something I'd never actually had. A grandmother I'd met once, who hadn't even recognized me, who'd spent her last lucid years protecting me from a distance. "There's something for you," the receptionist said. "Helen left instructions. Let me get the director." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a small office with Mrs. Chen, the nursing home director, who handed me a large envelope with my name written on it in shaky handwriting. "Helen was very specific, Mrs. Chen explained. This was to be given to Diana Patterson upon her death. She prepared it about 6 months ago during one of her last clear periods." Inside the envelope was a legal document. Helen Morrison's last will and testament, notarized and witnessed. I scanned through until I found the relevant passage. "I hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions, including the property located at 923 Oak Street, Sacramento, California, to my granddaughter Diana Marie Patterson. This includes the land deed filed with Sacramento County in 1985 and renewed in 2022. It is my wish that Diana use this property to build a life free from the manipulation and control that plagued her mother's existence." Helen had made it official. The land was mine now. Legally, irrevocably mine. A second envelope was tucked behind the will, thicker, sealed with old-fashioned wax, my name on the front in the same shaky handwriting. "She wrote this herself," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Took her 3 days. She'd write a few sentences, then rest, then write a few more. She was determined to finish it." I opened it carefully. 3 pages of lined paper, the writing growing progressively more difficult to read. like watching someone's strength fail in real time. "My dearest Diana," it began. "We never met, though I watched you from afar for 20 years. I saw you working those double shifts, saving every penny. I saw your mother move into your house and never leave. I saw the same pattern repeating itself, the same cycle of control and manipulation that I started when I failed your mother so completely." My hands were shaking. I kept reading. "I was 20 years old when I had Margaret. Unmarried, ashamed, terrified. I gave her away thinking someone better would love her. 2 years later, I had Claire. I kept her because I thought I'd learned my lesson. I thought I could do better the second time. But I was still poor, still ashamed, still terrified. I tried to raise Claire, but I was angry all the time. Angry at the world, angry at myself, angry at her for existing when her sister didn't. When Claire was 3, I convinced myself the same thing I'd convinced myself with Margaret, that someone else could love her better than I could. So I left her at Sacred Heart Hospital with a note pinned to her coat. I walked away and told myself I was setting her free. I had to stop reading, had to breathe. Mom had been abandoned at a hospital when she was 3 years old. The state put her in an orphanage. I found her again when she was 30, married to your father. I'd gotten some money by then. I tried to help. She wouldn't take it, wouldn't speak to me, said I had no right to call myself her mother. She was right, I had no right. But I watched her anyway. I saw her with you and your sister. I saw the same anger in her that had been in me, the same need to control everything because we'd been controlled by circumstance for so long. And I knew that if I didn't do something, the curse would pass to another generation. So I did what I could. I bought the land under your house. I kept the deed separate. I made sure that no matter what your mother tried to take from you, you'd always have something she couldn't touch. It's not much. It's not enough to make up for the damage I've done. But it's something." The writing got harder to read in the final paragraph, the letters large and unsteady. "Your mother needs a home, Diana. She needs stability and security because she never had it as a child. But you need freedom. You need to break the pattern. You need to choose your own path without her shadow over you. I can't tell you what to do. I failed at mothering too badly to give advice. But I can tell you this: choose wisely. Choose with your whole heart. But choose for yourself, not for her, not for me, not for anyone else. The curse ends when you decide it ends. Love, Grandma Helen." I sat in that office holding a letter from a grandmother I'd never known, crying for a woman who'd made terrible mistakes and spent her final years trying to correct them. Helen hadn't been a saint. She'd abandoned both her daughters. She'd caused immeasurable pain. But she'd also seen the cycle and tried to break it. Mrs. Chen handed me a tissue. "She was at peace when she passed," she said quietly. "The nurses said she smiled in her sleep, like she knew her work was done." I folded the letter carefully. I thought about Mom, 3 years old, abandoned at a hospital. About Helen, young and terrified, walking away from her own child. About me standing at the same crossroads, trying to decide whether to show mercy or enforce justice. The curse Helen had talked about wasn't just about houses or money or control. It was about hurt people hurting people, generation after generation, each one passing their pain down like an inheritance. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about refusing to inherit the curse. I drove home from St. Mary's with Helen's letter on the passenger seat. The sun was setting, painting the Sacramento sky in shades of orange and purple, and I felt suspended between two versions of myself. The Diana who'd spent 15 years being controlled, and the Diana who was about to decide what came next. When I got home, Nina was in the kitchen making tea. Dad was at the table reading his newspaper. Mom's bedroom door was closed. I sat down and spread everything in front of me. Helen's will, her letter, the land deed, Dad's USB drive, 15 years of mortgage statements, the down payment receipt, all the evidence I'd need to win any legal battle Mom tried to start. "I need to make a decision," I said. Dad folded his newspaper. Nina brought her tea over and sat down. We looked at each other, this strange alliance we'd formed against the woman down the hall. What are your options? Nina asked quietly. I counted them off. Option 1, I use everything. Dad's recordings, the land deed, all the documentation. I file for immediate eviction based on Mom's fraud and illegal rental activity. I get her out within a week. Maggie says we'd win easily. Option 2, Dad asked. I go back to the original plan. Force her to sign a lease with clear boundaries. $500 a month rules about behavior, public acknowledgement that this is my house. She stays, but on my terms. And option 3, Nina said. I sell the house. Take whatever equity I have left after paying off the mortgage. You and I find an apartment together, Dad finds his own place, and Mom has to figure out her own life. Clean break. No more fighting. We sat in silence. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking. What does Maggie think you should do? Dad asked. I'd called her from the car, told her about Helen's death and the letter. She said justice isn't always loud, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away with your integrity intact. She said whatever I choose, she'll support me, but she wants me to think about what I can live with 10 years from now. Smart woman, Dad said. Nina reached across the table and took my hand. Diana, please don't let her turn you into her. I've been thinking about what Dorothy said about how Mom saves strangers but destroys her own family. If you use Dad's recordings to humiliate her, if you drag her through court and expose every cruel thing she's ever said, you'll win. But you'll become exactly what she is. Someone who uses people's pain as a weapon. She's been using my pain as a weapon for 38 years. I said, but there was no heat in it, just exhaustion. I know, and you have every right to fight back. But there's a difference between protecting yourself and destroying someone else, even if they deserve it. I looked at Dad. What do you think I should do? He was quiet for a long time. I'll stand with you regardless, he said finally. If you want to evict her tomorrow, I'll help you pack her things. If you want to make her sign a lease and follow rules for the first time in her life, I'll be a witness. If you want to sell this place and start over, I'll help you find an apartment. He paused. But Diana, I've spent 15 years documenting her cruelty. I know exactly who she is. And I also know who you are. You're not cruel. You're not vindictive. You're hurt and you're angry, and you have every reason to be both. But whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can live with when the anger fades. I got up and walked to the window. I could see my reflection in the glass, tired and uncertain. Behind me, Nina and Dad waited. I thought about Helen's letter, about choosing for myself, about breaking the curse instead of passing it on. I thought about Mom, 3 years old, left at a hospital with a note pinned to her coat, about how that abandonment had shaped everything that came after. I thought about the 12 women from church who'd stood on my porch offering to testify against her, about Dorothy, who Mom had saved from an abusive husband, about all the contradictions that made up Claire Patterson. I thought about what I actually wanted, not what was fair, not what was just, but what would let me sleep at night. What would let me look in the mirror 10 years from now and recognize the person looking back? Revenge would feel good for a moment, maybe a week. But then I'd have my house to myself, but I'd also have the knowledge that I'd used my father's secret recordings to destroy my mother's reputation. Peace would be nice, but how do you find peace when the person who hurt you is still in your house, still expecting you to take care of her? And selling felt like letting her win, like admitting that she'd successfully poisoned this house, this life beyond repair. But there was a fourth option, one that had been forming in my mind since I'd read Helen's letter, one that nobody had suggested because it was too complicated, too risky, too dependent on things I couldn't control. I turned back to Nina and Dad. I'm not going to evict her immediately. I'm not going to make her sign a humiliating lease, and I'm not going to sell the house. Nina frowned. Then what are you going to do? I'm going to make her face herself, really face herself. Not through recordings or evidence or court battles. I'm going to sit down with her and tell her everything I know. About Helen, about the abandonment, about the curse she's been passing down, And then I'm going to give her a choice she's never had before." "What choice?" Dad asked. "The choice to change, or the choice to leave, on her own terms, with her dignity intact." I looked at both of them. "Helen said the curse ends when I decide it ends. Well, I'm deciding, but I'm giving Mom the same choice. She can end it too, or she can keep being who she's always been somewhere else." Nina's eyes widened. "Diana, that's not going to work. She's not going to suddenly become a different person because you had one honest conversation. Maybe not, probably not, but I need to try. I need to know that I offered her something better than what Helen offered her. A real choice. A real chance." I sat back down at the table. "And if she refuses, if she chooses to stay the same, then I'll use everything. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence. But I'll know I tried the kind option first." Dad looked at me with something like wonder in his eyes. "You're giving her what Helen never gave her." "I'm giving her what I would want someone to give me," I said. I chose the fourth option, the one no one saw coming. Maggie arranged the mediation for Tuesday afternoon at her office. She'd contacted Gerald Brennan and informed him that we were willing to discuss a settlement outside of court. He'd agreed immediately, probably relieved he wouldn't have to file fraudulent documents after all. The conference room had a long table with chairs on either side. Maggie and I sat on one side. Mom and Gerald Brennan sat on the other. Dad sat at the end, technically neutral, but we all knew where his loyalties lay. At the head of the table was Patricia Oakes, a professional mediator. Maggie had hired a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent decades helping people resolve disputes without bloodshed. Mom looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She'd dressed carefully in a navy blue dress and pearls, her armor of respectability, but her hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the table. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began. "We're here to discuss the residential situation at 923 Oak Street and hopefully reach an agreement that works for everyone involved. Ms. Patterson, I understand you have a proposal." I'd rehearsed this 100 times in my head. I'd written it down, crossed it out, rewritten it. Now, sitting across from my mother with a mediator and lawyers present, the words felt both inadequate and essential. "I do," I said. I pulled out a typed document and slid copies across the table to everyone present. "These are my terms for allowing my parents to remain in the house." Gerald Brennan started to speak, but Maggie held up a hand. "Let her finish." I looked at Mom while I spoke. "First, you and Dad will sign a formal lease agreement. The rent will be $1 per month, symbolic but legal. This establishes clearly that you are tenants, not owners." Mom's face went pale, but she didn't interrupt. "Second, both of you will attend family therapy sessions with me and Nina for a minimum of 6 months, once a week, non-negotiable. If you miss more than 2 sessions without a medical excuse, the lease is void." "Diana, that's—" Mom started. "I'm not finished." My voice was steady. "Third, you will write a public statement to the St. Andrew's congregation, not an apology for living in my house, an acknowledgement that you've been presenting a false image of our family, that you've used your reputation in the community as a shield while treating your own family poorly. It doesn't have to be long, but it has to be truthful." Gerald Brennan was shaking his head. "Ms. Patterson, you can't demand that someone publicly humiliate themselves as a condition of housing." "I'm not demanding humiliation," I said. "I'm demanding honesty. And it's not a condition of housing. It's a condition of continuing to live in my house, which I'm under no legal obligation to provide." And fourth, I continued, turning back to Mom, "any violation of these terms results in immediate eviction, no second chances, no negotiations. If you break the lease, if you skip therapy, if you refuse to write the statement, you leave, immediately." Patricia made notes on her legal pad. "These terms are unusual but not unprecedented in family mediation situations. Mrs. Patterson, would you like to respond?" Mom stared at the document in front of her. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she worked through each clause. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. "You're punishing me with kindness," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't you see that you're giving me exactly what I need and making it impossible for me to accept? You know I can't do this. You know I can't stand up in church and tell everyone I've been lying to them. You know I can't sit in therapy and talk about my feelings with some stranger." She wiped at her eyes angrily. "This makes me the villain forever. The terrible mother who has to be forced into therapy. The fraud who lied to her church community. You might as well just evict me now and be done with it." "That's not what this is," I said quietly. "Then what is it?" Mom's voice rose. "Because it feels like you're backing me into a corner and calling it mercy." I leaned forward. "Mom, do you know how Helen died?" She blinked, confused by the change of subject. "Who?" "Helen Morrison, your mother, my grandmother. She died Sunday morning." Mom's face went completely blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Helen Morrison, born 1936, gave birth to Margaret Chen Morrison in 1963 and gave her up for adoption. Gave birth to you in 1965 and left you at Sacred Heart Hospital when you were 3 years old." I kept my voice gentle. "She spent the last 40 years trying to make up for abandoning you. She bought the land under my house to protect me from you. She left me a letter explaining everything." Mom stood up so abruptly her chair fell backward. "Stop it. Stop talking about her." "She was sick, Mom. Young and poor and terrified. She made terrible choices. But she knew what she'd done to you. She knew she'd damaged you. And she spent her whole life trying to break the cycle. I don't need a dead woman's pity." Mom said, her voice shaking with rage. "This isn't about her pity. It's about you having a choice. You can stay here and do the work. Real work. Therapy and honesty and facing the things you've spent your whole life running from. Or you can leave and keep being who you've always been." I stood up too, facing her across the table. "But Mom, these terms aren't punishment. They're not about making you the villain. They're about making you human." "Human?" she repeated bitterly. "Yes, human. Flawed and broken and capable of change. Like everyone else. You've spent so long pretending to be perfect that you forgot it's okay to be broken. The church community doesn't need another saint. They need someone real, someone who admits she's struggling." I paused. "The question is, can you live with that?" Mom looked at me for a long moment, then at the document on the table, then at Patricia, at Maggie, at Gerald Brennan, finally at Dad. "Can I?" she whispered. The room was silent. She wanted a war. I gave her a mirror. Mom didn't answer the question. She picked up her purse, walked out of the mediation room, and left Maggie's office without saying another word. Gerald Brennan scrambled after her, calling something about reviewing the terms and getting back to us. Dad stayed seated, staring at the document on the table like he was trying to memorize it. "That went better than I expected," Maggie said quietly. "Better?" I looked at her. She walked out. She didn't say no. She didn't hire Gerald to file more fraudulent claims. She asked herself if she could live with being human. Diana, that's progress. When I got home an hour later, Mom's car was in the driveway, but her bedroom door was closed. I heard movement inside, the sound of drawers opening and closing. I knocked softly. "Mom, can we talk?" No answer, just more sounds of movement. Then nothing. Silence. By evening, she still hadn't come out. I left a sandwich outside her door. It sat there untouched until the next morning. Day 2 was worse. The sandwich had been moved, but only to the trash can in the hallway bathroom. She hadn't eaten it. I tried knocking again, calling through the door, asking if she was all right. Nothing. Dad tried too. Even Nina, who Mom had barely spoken to since she'd moved in, stood outside that door, pleading for some sign that she was okay. The only indication that Mom was alive was the occasional sound of running water from her bathroom and the creak of her bed frame when she moved around. "Should we be worried?" Nina asked on the second evening. What if she's hurt? What if she's done something to herself? I thought about what Dad had told me, about Mom's suicide attempts in 1988 and 1995, about how he'd stayed to keep her alive. Dad, do you think she's safe in there? He stood outside her door for a long moment, listening. She's moving around. I can hear her. If she was in real danger, I'd know. He looked at me with tired eyes. She's not trying to hurt herself. She's trying to figure out who she is without the mask. On the morning of day 3, I woke to find Mom's bedroom door open. I got up quickly and looked inside. The room was empty, the bed unmade. For a moment, panic seized me. Had she left in the middle of the night? Had she packed her things and disappeared? Then I heard sounds from the kitchen. Water running. The clink of a mug against the counter. I found her sitting at the kitchen table in an old bathrobe I'd never seen her wear, her hair unwashed and hanging loose around her shoulders. She looked 10 years older than she had at the mediation. Her eyes were swollen and red, her face bare of makeup. In front of her was a cup of black coffee and a small book with a worn leather cover. Mom. She looked up at me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not manipulation, just exhaustion. Complete and utter exhaustion. Sit down, she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. I sat across from her, my heart pounding. Mom pushed the small book across the table. It was a diary, the kind with a little lock that didn't actually keep anyone out. The lock was broken, had been for years by the look of it. The cover was dated 1987. I want you to read something, she said. Page 23, April 14th. I opened the diary carefully. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. Mom's handwriting from 38 years ago was neater than it was, now more controlled. I found April 14th. The entry began simply, Michael stopped breathing last night. I looked up at Mom. Who's Michael? Keep reading. My hands trembled as I read the entry. It was short, written in the clipped, emotionless style of someone in shock. Michael stopped breathing last night. The doctors said there was fluid in his lungs. Pneumonia, they called it. Treatable, they said. With the right antibiotics, with hospitalization, with money we don't have. They kept him for 3 days. Then they sent us a bill for $12,000 and told us he needed to stay another week. Bob's insurance from the hardware store doesn't cover dependents. I have no insurance at all. We asked about payment plans. They said we'd need a deposit first. $3,000. We have $400 in our bank account. I begged them. I got on my knees in the hospital corridor and begged them to help him. They called security. They made us take him home. We tried everything. Home remedies, prayer. Bob held him all night while he struggled to breathe. This morning he just stopped. 3 years old. My baby. My Michael. Gone because I couldn't afford to save him. I couldn't breathe. I read the entry again, then again, trying to process what I was seeing. Mom, I didn't know. I never knew you had another child. No one knows. Her voice was barely a whisper. We buried him in a county cemetery. No headstone. Couldn't afford one. Your father wanted to tell people, wanted to have a funeral, but I couldn't. I couldn't stand up in front of everyone and admit that my son died because I was too poor to save him. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. You were born 5 months later. Surprise pregnancy. I was still grieving Michael, and suddenly I was carrying you. I remember thinking, this one will be different. This one I'll protect. This one will never know what it's like to need something and not have it. I turned the page. The next entry was dated a week later. I will never be poor again, it read. I will never lose another child to nothing. I will do whatever it takes. I will build a life where money is never the reason something terrible happens, where image and reputation open doors that poverty kept locked. I will make sure my daughters never have to beg for their children's lives. I looked up at Mom and she was crying silently, tears running down her face unchecked. "That's why," she said. "That's why I needed the house. Why I needed to look successful. Why I couldn't stand the idea of you struggling or Nina marrying someone who didn't have money. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about making sure you never felt what I felt. Standing in a hospital corridor being told your child could live if only you had $3,000. I sat there holding this diary this window into a grief I'd never known existed. Understanding finally where the obsession came from. The need to control. The desperation to project success. It didn't excuse what she'd done to me. Didn't make the manipulation and cruelty okay. But it explained it. Her cruelty had a name. It was grief wearing a crown. I sat with Mom at the kitchen table, the diary between us, neither of us speaking. The weight of Michael's story hung in the air like smoke. After a long silence, Mom picked up her coffee and walked back to her bedroom. The door closed softly this time. Just a quiet retreat. I stayed at the table reading entry after entry of grief so raw it hurt to witness. I didn't hear Dad come in from his morning walk until he was standing in the doorway. "She showed you," he said, not a question. I looked up at him. "You knew about Michael. You were there when he died." "I was." Dad sat down heavily. "I held him while he died, felt his little body go still in my arms. I've never forgotten the weight of him. 3 years old and he weighed nothing. Why didn't you ever tell us Nina and I had a brother and you never said anything?" Dad was quiet for a moment. "Your mother made me promise. The day after we buried him, she said if I ever told anyone what happened, she'd leave me. She said she couldn't live in a world where people knew her son died because she was poor. She said the shame would kill her." "So you just kept it secret for 38 years? "I did more than that." Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. "I begged her to get help. Professional help. A therapist, a grief counselor, anyone. We had that conversation at least once a year for 30 years. Every time she said the same thing." "What did she say?" "That therapy is for weak people. That talking about feelings with a stranger wouldn't bring Michael back. That the only thing that mattered was making sure it never happened again. Making sure we were never poor again. Never helpless again." He rubbed his face. "I couldn't make her understand that grief doesn't work that way. That you can't just decide to be successful and have the pain go away. But she wouldn't listen." I thought about all the years I'd watched Mom obsess over appearances, over money, over control. The house. That's why she couldn't let go of my house. It represented security. Everything represented security to her. Money in the bank, a nice car, church friends who thought we were doing well, your sister marrying into a wealthy family. It was all armor against the memory of standing in that hospital being told her child could live if only she had $3,000. Dad's voice broke. "But the armor was killing you and Nina. I could see it. Every time she criticized you, every time she manipulated Nina, I could see what it was doing to you both." "Then why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you protect us?" Dad stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. "Because I was afraid she'd die if I left. Diana, there are things I never told you. Things I should have told you a long time ago." My chest tightened. "What things?" "Your mother tried to kill herself. Twice." He said it so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "The first time was in 1988. You were about a year old. I came home from work and found her in the bathroom with a bottle of pills. I got her to the hospital in time. They pumped her stomach. When I asked the doctors what we should do, they said she needed intensive therapy and possibly medication. Your mother refused, said if I ever told anyone what happened, she'd try again and make sure she succeeded." I couldn't speak, couldn't process this. The second time was in 1995. Nina was 3, the same age Michael had been when he died. I think that triggered something in your mother. I found her in the garage with the car running, sitting in the driver's seat with the engine on and the garage door closed. His voice shook. "I pulled her out, called 911. They kept her for a week. Same story. She refused therapy, made me promise not to tell anyone, said if I didn't keep her secret, she'd find a way to finish what she'd started. I felt like the floor was falling away beneath me. Dad, that's not your fault. You couldn't control what she did. Couldn't I? He turned to face me, eyes red. I made a choice every single day after that. I chose to stay, to keep her secrets, to enable her behavior because I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, if I insisted on therapy or medication or real help, she'd try again. And I couldn't live with the thought of coming home and finding her dead. So you sacrificed us instead. He flinched like I'd hit him. Yes. That's exactly what I did. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping your mother alive. I told myself that a flawed mother was better than a dead mother. I told myself that someday she'd get better on her own. He shook his head. She never did. She just got more controlling, more manipulative. And I kept quiet because I was afraid. Not for you, for her. You documented everything, I said. The USB drive, 15 years of recordings. I started documenting the day you bought this house. I watched her move in with you and I knew what was happening. I knew she was going to take everything from you the same way grief had taken everything from her. I thought maybe someday when you were strong enough to fight back, I could give you the proof you needed. But Diana, I should have done more. I should have stood up to her years ago. I should have insisted on therapy even if it meant she left me. I should have protected you and Nina instead of protecting her image. He sat back down, tears running down his face. I made a calculation. A terrible calculation. I decided your mother's survival was more important than your happiness. I thought I was being noble, thought I was holding the family together, but I was wrong. I know that now. Dad, no, let me finish, please. He looked at me with desperate eyes. I protected her survival over your happiness. I know now it was the wrong math. You can't build a healthy family on the foundation of one person's untreated trauma. You can't sacrifice your children's well-being to keep one person alive. But I didn't know that then. Or maybe I did know, and I was too much of a coward to act on it. I reached across the table and took his hand. You're not a coward. You were in an impossible situation. An impossible situation I chose to stay in, for 30 years. He squeezed my hand. Diana, when you put those terms on the table at mediation when you required therapy, you did what I should have done decades ago. You said love isn't enough. You said change is necessary. You gave her a choice I was too afraid to give her. We sat there in silence, father and daughter, both of us crying. I thought about all the years I'd resented Dad for his passivity, all the times I'd wished he'd stand up to Mom, all the anger I directed at him for letting her treat us the way she did. I'd thought he was weak. I'd thought he didn't care. I'd never imagined he was keeping her alive. He chose her survival over our happiness. And now he knew it was the wrong math. 2 days after Dad's confession, Mom signed the lease agreement. $1 per month. She signed it without looking at me, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name. The first therapy session was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Maggie had recommended Dr. Lan Nguyen, a family therapist who'd been practicing in Sacramento for over 30 years. Her office was in a converted Victorian house in Midtown, the kind of place that felt more like someone's living room than a clinical space. Comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, soft lighting, a bookshelf full of worn paperbacks and family photos. Dr. Nguyen was 65, Vietnamese American with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She greeted us at the door and gestured for us to sit wherever we felt comfortable. I chose a chair near the window. Dad sat across from me. Mom took the seat farthest from both of us, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. "Thank you all for coming," Dr. Nguyen said, settling into her own chair. "I'm glad you're here. I know this isn't easy, especially for a first session. Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space. What's said here stays here. There's no right or wrong way to feel. And most importantly, We're not here to assign blame. We're here to understand each other and to heal." Mom's jaw was tight. She stared at a spot on the wall just past Dr. Nguyen's shoulder. "I'd like to start by having each of you introduce yourselves," Dr. Nguyen continued. "Not just your name, but how you're feeling right now in this moment. Diana, would you like to start?" I took a breath. "I'm Diana. I'm 38. I'm feeling nervous and hopeful and scared all at the same time. I want this to work, but I don't know if it can." "Thank you for that honesty," Dr. Nguyen said. She turned to Dad. "Bob." "I'm Bob, 62. I'm feeling guilty, like I should have done this 30 years ago." "And Claire?" Mom didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp. "I'm Claire. I'm 60. And I'm feeling like this is American nonsense that's not going to change anything." Dr. Nguyen didn't react to the hostility. She just nodded. "You're skeptical. That's understandable. Therapy does feel strange when you're not used to it. But I'm curious, Claire. What would make this worthwhile for you? What would need to happen for you to feel like this wasn't a waste of time?" Mom looked at her for the first time. "Nothing. Because talking about feelings doesn't change facts. It doesn't bring back what's lost. It doesn't fix what's broken." "You're right," Dr. Nguyen said simply. "Therapy can't change the past, but it can change how we carry it. And sometimes that makes all the difference." She paused. "Can I ask you a question?" "Just one, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine." Mom's shoulders were rigid. What did you want to be when you were 10 years old?" The question hung in the air. It seemed so simple, so harmless. I watched Mom's face, waiting for her to deflect or refuse to answer or say something cutting about how irrelevant childhood dreams were. Instead, she went very still. "A teacher," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "A teacher," Dr. Nguyen repeated gently. "That's a beautiful dream. What made you want to teach?" Mom's hands tightened on her purse. "I liked books. I liked learning. I thought if I could teach, I could help other kids who felt stupid feel smart instead." "Kids like you." Mom's breath hitched. The orphanage had teachers who came once a week, volunteers from the community. Most of them were kind, but there was one woman, Mrs. Henderson, who told me I was too dumb to ever amount to anything. She said children like me, children nobody wanted, should be grateful for food and shelter and not waste time on dreams. A tear rolled down Mom's cheek. I was 10. I believed her. I thought if the orphanage people said I was dumb, it must be true. "But you didn't stay dumb, did you?" Dr. Nguyen asked. "No." Mom wiped at her face angrily. "I learned to read better than anyone in my class. I memorized everything. I worked harder than everyone else at everything because I had to prove she was wrong. I had to prove I wasn't the worthless orphan nobody wanted." "You spent your whole life proving her wrong," Dr. Nguyen said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Mom's voice broke. "I spent my whole life trying to be perfect. Perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect church volunteer, perfect neighbor. Because if I was perfect, no one could say I was the dumb orphan who didn't deserve anything good." I sat there watching my mother cry, really cry, maybe for the first time in my life. Not the manipulative tears she'd used to get her way. Real tears. The kind that came from a wound so old and so deep that it had shaped everything she'd become. "Claire," Dr. Nguyen said softly, "that 10-year-old girl who wanted to be a teacher. The one Mrs. Henderson told she was too dumb. She's still inside you, isn't she?" Mom nodded, unable to speak. "And she's still trying to prove she's not worthless." "Every day," Mom whispered. "Every single day." "Doctor." Nguyen pulled a tissue box from the side table and handed it to Mom. "Here's what I'd like you to do before our next session. I want you to write a letter to that 10-year-old girl. Tell her everything you wish someone had told you back then. Tell her what you know now that you didn't know then. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be perfect. But it needs to be honest. Mom took a tissue, held it against her eyes. I don't know if I can. Try, Dr. Nguyen said. Just try. We sat in silence for a moment. I looked at my mother, seeing her differently than I ever had before. Not as the woman who'd controlled and manipulated me, but as a child who'd been told she was worthless and had spent 60 years trying to prove otherwise. Healing, I learned, doesn't start with apologies. It starts with seeing the child inside the monster. We had 3 more therapy sessions over the next 2 weeks. Each one peeled back another layer. Mom was still defensive, still struggled with vulnerability, but she was showing up. She'd written the letter to her 10-year-old self, though she wouldn't read it aloud in session. Dr. Nguyen said that was fine. The important thing was that she'd written it. I was at work on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. Nina's name on the screen. It's time, she said, her voice tight with pain. The contractions started an hour ago. I'm at Mercy General. I grabbed my purse and left without explanation, texting my boss from the car. The hospital was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like an hour. I found Nina in a labor and delivery room, her face pale but determined, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. Where's David? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I didn't call him. Nina gripped my hand as another contraction hit. I called Marcus. He's on his way. And I called you. I stayed with her through 6 hours of labor. Marcus arrived halfway through, a tall man with kind eyes who looked terrified and thrilled in equal measure. When Nina told him the baby was his, that she was leaving David, that she wanted to start over with him if he'd have her, he cried and said yes before she'd even finished the question. The baby arrived just after 8 in the evening. A girl 7 pounds 3 ounces with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire floor. She's perfect, Nina whispered, holding her daughter for the first time. She's absolutely perfect. I stood beside the bed looking down at my niece, this tiny person who represented a different choice. Nina choosing love over security, choosing truth over appearances. What are you going to name her? I asked. Nina looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Helen Marie, after the grandmother who tried to break the curse. I felt my throat tighten. Mom's going to have something to say about that. I know. Nina touched the baby's tiny hand. But I don't care anymore. I'm done living for what Mom thinks. I'm done being afraid of disappointing her. This is my daughter, and I'm naming her after a woman who had the courage to admit she was wrong and try to fix it. Marcus stood on the other side of the bed, one hand on Nina's shoulder, staring at his daughter like he couldn't quite believe she was real. It's a beautiful name, he said softly. The nurse came in to check on Nina and the baby, and I stepped out into the hallway to give them privacy. I was standing by the window looking out at the parking lot when I saw Mom's car pull in. My first instinct was panic. Nina didn't want David here, didn't want the confrontation, didn't want anything to disturb this moment of peace with her daughter. But then I saw that Mom was alone. Dad wasn't with her. She'd come by herself. I met her at the elevator. How did you know? Your father told me. She was carrying a small gift bag, her face uncertain. I know Nina probably doesn't want me here, but I had to come. I had to see my granddaughter. Mom, if you're going to say anything about David or the marriage or... I'm not. She looked at me, and I saw something different in her eyes. Not the sharp defensiveness I was used to. Something softer. Diana, I've been thinking about what Dr. Nguyen said. About the 10-year-old girl inside me who's still trying to prove she's not worthless. I've been thinking about what I did to Nina. How I pushed her into a marriage because I thought security mattered more than love. How I made the same mistake with her that the world made with me. We stood there in the hospital hallway, the smell of antiseptic and the sound of beeping monitors all around us. I want to apologize to her, Mom said. I don't know if she'll accept it, but I need to try. I led her to Nina's room, knocked softly. Nina looked up, saw Mom, and her whole body tensed. I can leave if you want me to, Mom said from the doorway. But I wanted to see the baby. Just for a minute. And I wanted to say something. Nina looked at Marcus, who nodded. It's okay, Nina said quietly. You can come in. Mom approached the bed slowly like she was approaching something sacred. When she saw the baby in Nina's arms, her face crumpled. Oh, she breathed. Oh, she's beautiful. Her name is Helen, Nina said, watching Mom's reaction carefully. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Helen. After my mother. After the woman who tried to fix her mistakes, Nina corrected. I want my daughter to know that it's never too late to change, that acknowledging you were wrong takes more courage than pretending you were right. Mom reached out tentatively and Nina shifted the baby so Mom could see her better. I'm sorry, Mom whispered, and at first I thought she was talking to the baby. But then she looked at Nina. I'm sorry I made you choose him. I'm sorry I convinced you that money and status mattered more than love. I'm sorry I tried to control your life because I was terrified of my own. Nina's eyes were wet. I thought you'd disown me if I said no. If I chose Marcus over David. If I admitted I was pregnant with someone else's baby. I thought you'd hate me if I wasn't perfect, Mom said. If I couldn't give you the perfect life, the perfect wedding, the perfect son-in-law. I thought if I wasn't perfect, you'd see me the way I saw myself, as worthless. They looked at each other across that hospital bed, mother and daughter, both of them crying now. Marcus stepped back, giving them space. I stayed by the door watching 3 generations of women in one room. Mom, who'd been abandoned at 3 and spent 60 years trying to prove she deserved to exist. Nina, who'd been controlled by that fear and was now breaking free. And baby Helen sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware of the weight of history she'd been born into. But she wouldn't carry that weight. Not the way we had, because we were choosing differently. We were choosing to face the pain instead of passing it down. We were choosing to break instead of bend others to our breaking point. The baby didn't inherit our trauma. She inherited our chance to break free. Nina came home from the hospital 3 days later with baby Helen and Marcus. They moved into the 3rd bedroom temporarily, while Nina figured out divorce proceedings. The house was fuller than ever, and strangely it felt more like a home. Mom had been different since seeing the baby. Quieter, more thoughtful. She'd attended 2 more therapy sessions, and had even started talking to Dad again, real conversations, instead of cold silence. The following Tuesday, the hot water stopped working. I checked the water heater in the basement and found water pooling on the concrete floor. The plumber arrived that afternoon. Ray had been in business for 30 years and had seen everything. He shook his head at the water heater. This thing is ancient, but I'm more concerned about this. He pointed to where water had spread toward the foundation wall. You've got a leak in your main water line. It's been seeping for months. I need to excavate part of the foundation to get to it. I authorized the work. Ray and his assistant spent the next day with jackhammers breaking up a section of the basement floor. The noise was deafening. Mom stayed in her room. Nina took the baby upstairs. I was making coffee when Ray knocked on the doorframe. Ms. Patterson, you might want to come down here. We found something. Where the concrete floor had been, there was now exposed dirt and old stone foundation. In the corner, partially buried, was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox wrapped in deteriorating plastic. Sometimes construction workers bury stuff as a time capsule, Ray said. We find all kinds of things. He helped me pull the box free. The plastic crumbled. The wooden box was warped but intact. There was writing on top, faded but legible, Morrison. My heart stopped. Helen's name. I carried it upstairs, hands shaking. Set it on the kitchen table. Opened it carefully. Inside was an envelope yellowed and water-stained, but sealed. The address was written in neat handwriting. Claire Chen, 412 Oak Street, Sacramento, CA 95816. Stamped across it in red ink, return to sender, no forwarding address, attempted delivery, May 1985. May 1985, 2 months before Michael died. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter on lined stationery and a check. $50,000 dated May 15, 1985, signed by Helen Morrison. The letter was short. My dearest Claire, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you told me to stay away. But I found out about your little boy, about Michael, about how he's been sick. I heard you need money for his treatment. Please take this. Please let me help. I know I have no right to call myself your mother. I know I abandoned you when you were just a baby. I know I can never make up for that. But please, please let me do this one thing. Let me help save your son. I'm begging you. Don't let pride stand in the way of his life. Whatever you think of me, however much you hate me, he's innocent. Please use this money to help him. With love and regret, Helen Morrison. I stared at the letter, at the check that had never been cashed at the date 2 months before Michael died of pneumonia, because there was no money for treatment. Mom came out of her room. She saw the box, saw the envelope in my hands, and froze. What is that? I couldn't speak. I just handed her the letter. She read it once, then again, her face going progressively paler. When she saw the check, she made a sound like she'd been punched. No, she whispered. No, this can't be real. It was buried under the foundation, I said quietly. The plumber found it. It's stamped return to sender. Mom, where were you living in May 1985? Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper. 412 Oak Street. That was our apartment before Michael got sick. She looked up with devastated eyes. In April, Helen found me somehow. She came to the apartment. She wanted to meet Michael, wanted to help. I told her to leave, told her I didn't need her charity. I didn't want anything from the woman who'd abandoned me. And then you moved. The next week, we moved to a different address because I couldn't stand the thought of her showing up again. I didn't tell anyone where we were going. I just wanted to get away from her. Mom's voice broke. I didn't leave a forwarding address with the post office because I didn't want her to find us. So when she sent this letter, it got returned to her, and she must have left it somewhere or dropped it, and the construction workers building this house in 1987 found it and thought it was trash. So they threw it in before they poured the foundation. Mom was crying now, great heaving sobs. Diana, there was $50,000. Michael needed $30,000 for his treatment. I could have saved him. If I'd just opened the door when she came. If I'd just given her a chance. If I'd just left a forwarding address. She sank into a chair, the letter clutched in her hands. My pride killed him. I was so determined to prove I didn't need her, so determined to show that I could handle everything on my own, that I let my son die rather than accept help from the woman who'd abandoned me. I knelt beside her chair. Mom, you didn't know. You didn't know she was sending money. I should have known she'd try to help. That's what she was trying to do when she came to the apartment. But I wouldn't listen. I slammed the door in her face. I told her she had no right to call herself my mother, no right to anything in my life. And then I ran away. She looked at the check again. I killed my own son because I was too proud to accept help from the person who'd hurt me most. Dad came into the kitchen. He saw the letter, saw Mom's face, and understood immediately. We sat there, the three of us, looking at a $50,000 check from 1985 that had been buried under concrete for 38 years. A check that could have saved a little boy's life, if only pride hadn't stood in the way. Pride, we learned, has a body count. Mom didn't sleep that night. I heard her moving around in her room, the creak of her bed, the sound of drawers opening and closing. When I got up at 6 a.m, she was already sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and paper in front of her. I'm withdrawing the case, she said without looking up. Gerald Brennan filed a response to your eviction notice claiming adverse possession. I'm calling him this morning and telling him to withdraw it. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She looked at me then, and her eyes were red from crying but clear. Diana, I have no legal standing to claim this house. I never paid for it. I never contributed to the mortgage. I lived here for free while you worked yourself to exhaustion. But more than that, I have no moral standing either." She pushed the paper across the table. It was a handwritten statement, her penmanship shaky but legible. "To the Sacramento County Superior Court. I, Claire Patterson, hereby withdraw all claims to the property at 923 Oak Street. I acknowledge that I have no legal ownership of this property. I acknowledge that my daughter Diana Patterson is the sole legitimate owner and has been since 2010. I further acknowledge that any claims I made regarding adverse possession or residency rights were without merit. I have no legal standing in this matter. I have no moral standing either. Signed, Claire Patterson." I read it twice, trying to process what I was seeing. "You wrote this last night?" "I wrote 6 versions of it. This is the one that tells the truth." She stood up and poured herself coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. "I called Gerald Brennan at 7 this morning, left him a voicemail telling him I'm firing him and withdrawing the case. I'll send this to the court myself today. The eviction hearing is scheduled for next week. Then there won't be anything to hear." Mom sat back down, wrapping both hands around her coffee mug. "Diana, I spent 60 years trying to prove I deserved to exist. I built a whole life around being perfect, around never needing help, around controlling everything, so I'd never be powerless again. And in the process, I became exactly what I was running from. I became someone who hurts the people who love her most." She looked at me with exhausted honesty. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't bring Michael back. I can't give you back 15 years of mortgage payments. I can't erase the ways I've hurt you and Nina. But I can stop fighting. I can stop pretending I have any right to this house or any right to make demands. I can just tell the truth." 3 days later, Maggie called me. The court received Claire's withdrawal. Gerald Brennan also filed a notice that he's withdrawing as her attorney. Technically, we could just close the case now, but Judge Martinez wants to see all of you in her chambers. She said it's not required, but she'd appreciate it if you could come in. Judge Sarah Martinez was in her late 50s, a woman with kind eyes and iron-gray hair pulled back in a bun. Her chambers were lined with law books and family photos. She gestured for us to sit in the chairs arranged in front of her desk. Mom. Dad and I sat together. Maggie stood by the door. "This is completely off the record," Judge Martinez began. "Nothing said in this room goes into any official transcript. I asked you here because in 30 years on the bench, I've seen a lot of family property disputes. Most of them end badly. Families torn apart. People who once loved each other becoming enemies. So when I see a case like this one where someone actually withdraws their claim and admits they were wrong, I want to acknowledge it." She looked directly at Mom. "Mrs. Patterson, I read your statement. That took courage." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "It took finding a letter from my dead mother to make me see what I'd become. Sometimes that's what it takes." Judge Martinez leaned back in her chair. "I want to make sure I understand the current arrangement. Ms. Diana Patterson, you own the property free and clear." "Yes, Your Honor, I hold the mortgage and I inherited the land deed from my grandmother, Helen Morrison." "And Mrs. Patterson, you've signed a lease agreement to remain in the property." $1 per month, Mom said, "for as long as Diana allows me to stay. And you're attending family therapy. Once a week. We've had 6 sessions so far." Judge Martinez made a note on her pad. "Mr. Patterson, where do you stand in all this?" Dad cleared his throat. "I'm listed as a co-tenant on the lease now. My daughter added me last week. I'm supporting whatever Claire needs to heal and whatever Diana needs to feel safe in her own home." "Good." Judge Martinez signed something on her desk, then looked up at all of us. "Here's what's going to happen officially. I'm dismissing this case with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. The eviction notice is withdrawn. The property ownership stands as documented. Diana Patterson is the sole legal owner of 923 Oak Street. The lease agreement between Diana Patterson and Claire and Robert Patterson is a private matter between you and doesn't require court oversight." She paused, then added more softly. Here's what I'm going to say unofficially. You're doing the hard work, the real work. Not the legal battles or the property disputes, but the actual healing that needs to happen in families when there's been trauma and hurt. Most people never get this far. Most people stay angry or stay in denial or stay locked in the same patterns forever. You're choosing something different. Keep going. Mom was crying silently. Dad handed her a tissue. One more thing, Judge Martinez said. Mrs. Patterson, I lost my mother to Alzheimer's 5 years ago. She spent her last years not knowing who I was. I would have given anything for one more lucid conversation with her, for one more chance to tell her I understood why she made the choices she made. She looked at Mom with unexpected gentleness. Your mother left you a letter. She tried to help you even when you didn't want her help. That's worth something. That's worth remembering. We left the courthouse 20 minutes later with a folder of official documents. Case dismissed, lease agreement filed, land deed transferred, everything legal and binding and finished. But walking to our cars in the parking lot, I realized Judge Martinez was right. The legal resolution was the easy part. It was clean, final. A signature on a document and it was done. The real work was what came after. The therapy sessions where Mom slowly peeled back layers of defense. The conversations where Dad admitted his failures. The moments when Nina brought baby Helen over and we all sat together, 3 generations of Patterson women learning how to be in the same room without someone getting hurt. The gavel fell, but the real verdict was still being written in our hearts. Mom spent 2 days writing her statement. I'd see her at the kitchen table late at night, crossing out lines, starting over crumpling pages. She didn't ask for help. This was something she needed to do alone. Sunday morning, she wore a simple gray dress, no jewelry except her wedding ring. The statement was folded in her purse. You don't have to come, she said. This is my burden. I'm coming, I said. Nina stayed home with baby Helen, but Dad and I were going. The church was full. Pastor Reynolds led hymns and prayers. When it came time for announcements, Mom stood up. Whispers rippled through the sanctuary. Claire Patterson was walking to the front, but this wasn't her usual confident stride. This was the walk of someone approaching the gallows. She stood at the pulpit, gripping the lectern. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. Good morning, she said, voice cracking. She cleared her throat. I've stood before many of you over the years and talked about service, about faith, about being a good Christian woman. Today, I'm here to tell you the truth about who I really am. The church went silent. My name is Claire Patterson. I'm 60 years old. I was abandoned at an orphanage when I was 3. I grew up being told I was worthless, too dumb to amount to anything. I spent my entire life trying to prove those people wrong. I built a perfect image. Perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect church volunteer. I needed you all to see me as successful because I was terrified you'd see what I really was. She paused, looked at her paper, then back at the congregation. I built a castle of lies because I was afraid you'd see the ruins I came from, someone gasped softly. I manipulated my daughters. I pushed my youngest into a marriage she didn't want because the groom's family had money. I lived in my oldest daughter's house for 15 years without paying rent while she worked herself to exhaustion. I lied to you about owning property. I lied about my family being happy. I used this church community as a shield, hiding behind your respect while treating my own family with cruelty. Her hands trembled, but she kept reading. I had a son who died when he was 3 years old. His name was Michael. He died because I couldn't afford his medical treatment. Instead of grieving him properly, instead of getting help, I turned that loss into a weapon. I used it to justify controlling everything and everyone around me. I told myself I was protecting my family from poverty, but really I was destroying them with my fear. She folded the paper. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking you to forget what I've done. I'm telling you the truth, because the truth is all I have left. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to change. I'm trying to become the person I should have been all along. But I owe you honesty. I owe my family honesty. And I owe myself honesty, even if it means losing everything I've worked so hard to build." The silence was crushing. Mom stood there, exposed and vulnerable, waiting for judgment. Then Martha Hendricks stood up. She stepped into the aisle and walked toward the front. Joyce Hernandez stood next, then another woman and another. One by one, the 12 women who'd come to my house weeks ago walked to the front of the church. They didn't speak. They just stood beside Mom, a line of women who understood what it cost to tell the truth. Dorothy Chen was the last to stand. She moved slowly down the aisle, her cane tapping against the hardwood. When she reached the front, she turned to face the congregation. 23 years ago, Claire Patterson drove me to a women's shelter at 2 a.m. and saved my life, Dorothy said. She saw me being hurt and helped me when no one else would. So I know she's capable of extraordinary kindness. She turned to Mom. I also know she's capable of extraordinary cruelty. Both things are true. Both things are Claire. She addressed the congregation again. We're all ruins trying to rebuild. Every single one of us. We've all hurt people. We've all hidden parts of ourselves we're ashamed of. Claire's just the first one brave enough to stand up here and admit it. She looked at Mom with fierce compassion. Welcome to the truth. It's a hard place to live, but it's the only place where real healing happens. Slowly, people began to nod. Not everyone. Some faces were skeptical, still angry, but enough people understood. Pastor Reynolds stepped forward. The church is not a museum for saints. It's a hospital for sinners. Claire, you're welcome here, but welcome comes with accountability. We'll walk with you, but we'll expect you to keep doing the work. Keep going to therapy. Keep being honest. Keep showing up even when it's hard. Mom nodded, tears streaming. I will. I promise. I will. The service continued, but something had shifted. Mom sat in the front pew with the 12 women around her, not shielding her from consequences, but standing with her in the truth. After the service, people approached her. Some hugged her. Some shook her hand and said they'd pray for her. Some just nodded and walked past. It wasn't universal forgiveness, but it was something. The beginning of accountability met with grace. We drove home in silence. Mom stared out the window, exhausted, but somehow lighter. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. You did the right thing, Dad said. Mom looked at both of us. The right thing doesn't erase the wrong things, but it's a start. She was right, this wasn't the end. It was the middle. The hard middle where you face what you've done and commit to doing better day after day with no guarantee anyone will ever fully forgive you. Redemption wasn't forgiveness given. It was truth lived. 1 year later, I was standing at the stove making spaghetti when Mom walked into the kitchen and asked, Diana, would it be all right if I planted tomatoes in the backyard this spring? It was such a simple question, but it represented something profound. She was asking permission, not assuming, not taking, actually asking. Sure, I said, stirring the sauce. The spot by the back fence gets good sun. Thank you. She set the table without being asked, placing forks and napkins at each seat. Dad came in from the garage where he'd been fixing Nina's car, wiping grease from his hands. We sat down together, the three of us, and ate dinner while talking about ordinary things. The weather, the news, Mom's upcoming dentist appointment. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still times when old patterns tried to resurface. But it was peaceful, real. We'd had 47 therapy sessions over the past year, and Dr. Nguyen said we were making remarkable progress. Mom had written her letter to her 10-year-old self. She'd read it aloud in session 6 months ago, sobbing through every word. She was learning to recognize when she was trying to control situations out of fear rather than necessity. She was learning to apologize without making excuses. Nina arrived after dinner with baby Helen, who was walking now and chattering in that nonsensical language 1-year-olds speak. Marcus came too, his divorce from David finalized 3 months ago, his relationship with Nina growing stronger every day. Mom sat on the living room floor with Helen building towers of blocks and letting the baby knock them down over and over. I watched from the doorway as Mom laughed, really laughed at Helen's delighted squeals. "She's getting sleepy," Nina said eventually. "I should put her down." "Let me," Mom said. She picked up Helen, who was rubbing her eyes, and carried her to the couch. She sat down and began to rock gently, and then she started singing. It was a Vietnamese lullaby, soft and haunting in a language I'd never heard Mom speak. Helen's eyes grew heavy, her little fist clutching Mom's collar. "I didn't know you knew Vietnamese," Nina whispered. "My adoptive mother taught me when I was small," Mom said quietly, still singing between sentences. "Before she decided I should only speak English. I haven't sung this in 50 years. I watched my mother sing to her granddaughter in the language of her childhood, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Peace. Not the forced perfection she'd always projected, but actual peace. Later that week, I received a letter from Maggie. Inside were photos of the Morrison family reunion she'd organized. Cousins I'd never met. Aunts and uncles from Helen's side of the family. Maggie had found them all, had brought them together, had built the family connection that Helen had never managed to create. There was an invitation to visit them next month in Monterey, where several of them lived. I stood on my front porch that evening looking at those photos, and I realized something. This house had been my battleground, my prison, my proof that I could survive anything. But it had never really been my home. The for sale sign went up the next morning. Mom saw it from the kitchen window. She came outside, stood beside me, and looked at the sign for a long moment. "You're selling it," she said. Not a question. "We need a fresh start. All of us. Somewhere without ghosts." I looked at her. "There's a house available near Maggie in Monterey. 3 bedrooms, close to the ocean. I put in an offer yesterday." "The ocean?" Mom repeated softly. "I always wanted to live near the ocean." "I know." The buyers came a week later. A young Vietnamese couple with 2 small children, recent immigrants working hard to build a life in America. They reminded me of what Mom must have been at their age, struggling, hopeful, determined. "We'll take good care of it," the wife said in accented English, her eyes bright with dreams. I gave them all the furniture. The couch where Mom had sung to Helen. The kitchen table where we'd had so many painful conversations. The bed frames and dressers and everything else. They needed it more than I did. We moved to Monterey in April. The house near the ocean was smaller, simpler, but it was ours without the weight of history crushing us. Mom started a small cooking class in the community center, teaching Vietnamese recipes to a group of women who quickly became her friends. Real friends who knew her story and cared about her anyway. Nina and Marcus found an apartment nearby. Dad got a part-time job at a marina working with boats, something he'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I transferred to a different accounting firm and started taking art classes on weekends, something I'd given up when I was 23 and decided I had to be practical. On our last day at 923 Oak Street, I stood on the porch while the moving truck pulled away. The new family was arriving in an hour. I had the keys in my hand and a note I'd written that morning. I placed both in the mailbox. "Welcome home. May your story be kinder than ours." I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house I'd fought so hard for. The house that had represented everything I thought I needed. Security, independence, proof of my worth. But I'd learned something over the past year. I didn't need a house to prove I was worthy. I didn't need to win some battle with my mother to validate my existence. What I needed was right there in the car behind me. Dad driving the sedan with Mom in the passenger seat. Nina and Marcus following with baby Helen in her car seat. I didn't win the house. I won something better. A family that chose healing over history. I put the car in drive and headed toward the ocean, toward Maggie and the cousins I'd never met, toward a future we were writing together instead of repeating the past. I didn't look back. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If you made it this far, you've walked with me through 15 years of sacrifice, betrayal, discovery, and ultimately healing. This wasn't just a story about a house. It was about breaking cycles of trauma, choosing compassion over cruelty, and learning that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is offer someone a chance to change even when they don't deserve it. I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have evicted Claire immediately? Would you have given her the same choice I did? Or would you have walked away entirely and sold the house? There's no wrong answer. Every family situation is different, and what worked for me might not work for everyone. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And here's another question that's been on my mind. Do you think people like my mother can truly change? Can someone who spent 60 years building walls around their heart actually tear them down? Or is therapy just a band-aid on a wound that's too deep to heal? I'm still figuring that out myself, one day at a time. If this story resonated with you, if you've dealt with difficult family dynamics or struggled with setting boundaries with people you love, please hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this one, stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges and finding their way through. Your support means everything, and I'd love to have you along for the next journey. Most importantly, share your story in the comments. You're not alone in this. Sometimes just knowing that others understand can make all the difference. Thank you for listening.